Welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Notre Dame fans, IB Nation, we're glad to have you with us today. And we're going to do something a little bit different today. Normally, Friday is recruiting hour, and that is our recruiting director at Irish Breakdown, Ryan Roberts. But, Ryan, the coaches are on the road, and there's a lot of things we could talk about. But, I think there's a little bit more pressing things right now going on, and that is the 2024 NFL Draft. Last night was round one. We are going to discuss that now in today's show. We're going to kick things off by looking at, from a Notre Dame perspective, obviously Joe Alt got picked last night. We'll kick things off talking about that and just the fit and what we think and what the Chargers said about it and all that good stuff. And also kind of what it shows about Notre Dame's continued dominance is off O-line U, which I had a little data on that last night. And then once we're done with that, we're going to dive into an evaluation of the first round. Ryan and I have a lot of thoughts. We were texting and calling last night nonstop, and there was a lot. It was a very interesting night. And we talked yesterday in the show, Ryan, that it could go a lot of different ways. There could be a lot of movement. We also talked about how no one's going to move up because everybody's trying to move down. We saw a lot more moving down than we necessarily saw moving up with some teams. Very interesting night, and didn't quite go the way that most people thought, but I thought it was still a very interesting night. So we're going to talk about the picks we like, the picks we don't like, and just overall thoughts on last night's draft class, which was a very, very, very wild night, Ryan. And you were up way later than you normally are, man, but it was a wild night.
I packed it in as soon as the final pick was in, though. I can't. It was like 11:45. I'm like, yeah, I'm done, dude. I'm good. I don't need to be up any longer. So, but it was we'll get into obviously some of the head scratchers, but like the number 8 overall pick really threw things through some loops, man. Really
wow,
threw things some loops.
It really did shake up the entire draft, in my opinion.
And it continued until like pick 17, because 17 was a good pick in my opinion. But even that one was like one that you're just like, huh. Didn't think Dallas Turner would be there at 17 at that point. So it was a really strange like 9 pick swing. It was really strange.
Yes, and there's some guys on the board that I'm shocked are on the board. We'll talk about that in part 2 of today's show as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But Ryan, we're going to kick things off talking about things from Notre Dame perspective, because last night some history was made with Notre Dame, sort of history. At least it's been a long, long time. Joe Alt, we talked about the possibility yesterday of Joe Alt going number 5 to the Chargers. You actually had the Chargers taking Joe Alt in your mock draft. You just had them going down a spot to get him.
Yep.
So the fit was clearly there. But just what was your initial reaction, first and foremost, Ryan, to Joe Alt being the number 5 pick for the Los Angeles Chargers?
I mean, it was kind of validation for a second, because obviously we've been beating the drum of Joe Alt is the best offensive tackle in the class, but also I pushed back heavily on yesterday's show about Daniel Jeremiah and a couple other people saying JC Latham was going to be the first offensive tackle on the board. Like, I just didn't buy that. Now, JC Alt obviously ended up going very high. He went number 7 to the Tennessee Titans, so it's not like he wasn't far behind Joe, but it is obviously a testament to what Coach Jim Harbaugh is trying to now build in Los Angeles. No matter where he's been, the consistent factor has always been strong, powerful, good offensive lines. That has been the consistency. Think about what he did. I don't know who was on the offensive line at University of San Diego back in the day. Like, I'm not sure about that one, but Stanford always had really good offensive lines when he was there. The San Francisco 49ers had some guys named Joe Staley that were, pretty dang good football players. And I forget the guard's name that was from Idaho, who was at that point, but he was a monster as well. So they have always just kind of stressed that for his programs.
Then he goes to Mike Iupati guy.
Mike Iupati. Yeah, he was like a 6'5", 340-pound, just like behemoth playing left guard. So they've always had very strong offensive lines, obviously. And then he goes to Michigan, and how did Michigan win a national championship? It was built off of being a really strong offensive line-driven team. So him going to Los Angeles, the Chargers, it was a very interesting conversation because there was a lot of speculation of wide receiver, and wide receiver would have made sense. They got rid of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and if they would have taken Malik Neighbors at 5, I wouldn't have said a word because it makes sense for their needs. It really does. But obviously, what Jim Harbaugh has always stressed and been consistent with is offensive line play, which is pretty hilarious as a former quarterback. But yeah, so he opts for the pass blocking compared to the
Well,
pass
let me tell you, Ryan, as a former
Yes.
quarterback, that's always a priority for
Yep.
a quarterback, especially the older ones that didn't grow up in the 7-on-7 era. Absolutely, absolutely, that's an important thing.
Yeah. I think it's just the core value stuff, man. It's the core values of what Jim Harbaugh teams are built off of. They have had a hole at right tackle over the last couple years, a position that could clearly get upgraded. And if Joe Alt's the right tackle or there's some wheeling and dealing and he ends up at left, no matter how it ends up, the Los Angeles Chargers now have potentially one of the best bookends at tackle in the entire National Football League moving forward, potentially, if Joe Alt is what we think he is. So I think the fit makes a lot of sense. I think it's again consistent to the core values, and I completely understand why he was the pick at number 5.
Well, just to put some context, Ryan, into the history that was made last night, it was like it's not so much history and like something's never happened before, but it's been a long time. This is the highest Notre Dame player picked in the draft since Rick Meyer went number 2 overall back in 1993. Now they've been close. Quentin Nelson was number 6, and Ronnie Stanley was number 6. Bryant Young was number 7. So they've had top 10 picks. Mike McGlinchey was number 9. But to have a guy go top 5 overall, first time since 1993, and it's the highest Notre Dame offensive lineman pick since George Kuntz went number 2 overall back in 1969. So it just speaks, and to do it in a year where the draft class is loaded, and the reason I say that, Ryan, because when it's a bad draft class at left tackle, and let's say he was the only, then all of a sudden you can understand him going to top 5 because what's behind him maybe not as good. I felt that's partly why Mike McGlinchey got picked as high as he did back in 2018, because if you don't take McGlinchey there, it wasn't a great tackle class. So you could understand people reaching for him if it was a bad class. But in a stacked class, you're taking him because we think he's that guy.
Right.
That's the difference.
It wasn't a class where Luke Jokel and Eric Fisher are the first 2 picks, where you're just like, that's by default, right? Like in any ordinary year, Eric Fisher is probably more of a late 1, early 2 type of pick, but he's buoyed all the way up into the top 10 because of the need at that position. Obviously, is always there. So I think that for me, that is a testament to it. And honestly, Brian, like I think he just checked the most boxes at the end of the day. Like we've talked about this. Every tackle that was selected yesterday has some reason why an NFL team is valuing them heavily, right? And we could talk about J.C. Latham and the physicality and the power profile. We could talk about Amarius Mims and the upside and just kind of the freak show athleticism. We could talk about Olu Fashanu and the core strength he has and the quick feet he has. Like all these guys have something about them. Fuaga with the physicality and the movement skills. Like every one of these players has one thing or multiple things that makes him a really attractive player, which is why I think a lot of those guys will end up being good offensive tackles at the next level. But the reason that Joe Alt was number 5 and the first one off the board, in my opinion, is quite simply, what box doesn't he check? We've talked about this ad nauseum at this point, but you're 6'8 plus, you're 320 pounds, you have 34 plus inch arms, you are the son of a former NFL offensive lineman that was also a Pro Bowler and in the Ring of Honor. You were coached under Harry Hiestand for a year. You have the Notre Dame emblem next to your name. Like all those things tell you that Joe Alt is a very high floor player, right? And you could argue that a couple of those guys maybe have a higher ceiling. I would argue that Amarius Mims has a higher ceiling than Joe Alt, but he has a much higher floor. And I think that we have underestimated that in the draft community, that offensive line coaches on the NFL level, they care about floor, man. Ceiling's exciting, but they also care about floor.
Well, Ryan, you could just listening to the Chargers last night, I think a point that you make that I think is a great point, Ryan, is the notion that when you look at a lot of those guys, you could argue that there are certain guys that have strengths that are greater than what anything that Joe Alt's best strength is, just individual best strength. I think that's at least debatable to have that point. J.C. Latham's power is individually better than whatever you perceive Joe Alt's best attribute to be. And even a guy like Tyler Guyton that I have some questions about, your elite length, elite size, comes from a program that do this and do that. But the difference in Joe Alt is the things that people were looking for as criticisms of Joe Alt were nitpicks that aren't actually weaknesses. the notion that, oh, he's not real powerful. Well, yeah, if you're going back and watching his true freshman and true sophomore seasons and then ignoring his junior season. But that was what was so interesting about listening to. I wrote an article on one of our Irish breakdown sites today where I listened to the interview and transcribed the interview that they had last night. Jim Harbaugh and Jim how do you say it? Is it Jortiz? Is that how you say his last name? The GM for the Chargers.
I'm not even sure. Not even sure.
But
yeah.
They were talking about him, and they're talking about his power. Harbaugh's talking about his freaky athleticism. The other guy, the GM's talking about his power, and you're thinking like this is a proper evaluation of Joe Alt. This is what we've been saying all along. Like you can nitpick this, that, or the other thing, but the fact of the matter is this guy's an elite player. This guy's an elite talent that doesn't really have any flaws, and they just raved about him. I thought it was. You hear words, Ryan, that with Joe Alt that when you listen to the GMs, I think got missed by some evaluators. Today I'm not talking about draft Twitter. I'm talking about people that you and I would say that we respect.
Mainstream guys. Yeah.
Right. Guys that have some credibility to what they do.
Right.
And I don't think enough credit was given to Joe Alt's athleticism for his size. And that is something to where you listen to the Chargers they're using the word freaky. They're using the word elite athleticism. And I don't think enough people are putting enough credit into just how athletic Joe Alt is. Right. And it's something that you and I have been talking about when evaluating him for years, which is he's so clean and so smooth that you miss just how good he is.
Right. Well, I think that it happens all the time for some prospects. Like I remember talking to JC Horn about this, Brian, and JC was talking about how people had questions about his long speed. And then he literally said that he talked to a team and was like, when did I get beat deep? Like, when did I get beat deep? And then he runs 4.39 at his pro day. And you're like, yeah, maybe he just is smooth more than explosive, right? Or, it doesn't show up because it just makes everything look so easy. And that's what it's always been about Joe for me, is that I wasn't shocked when Joe tested as an elite athlete because I always just thought he was such a good athlete that he made everything look easy. Like the foot, if you had a foot speed concern with Joe Alt, my question would simply be this, and I have asked people this: when did you see him lose the outside track and lose around the corner? When did you see it?
Once, and here's why. And I'm being sarcastic. Once, when there was a snap miscommunication against Duke this year, and he didn't get out of a stance.
Right.
That's the one time he got beat outside. That's the only sack he allowed the last 2 years was to RJ Oben. In a play where there was a clear snap miscommunication, and RJ Obens is coming, and Joe Alt's still in his stance, and he still almost got to him. So I'm being sarcastic with that, Ryan, but it proves to the point. And it's not like Notre Dame hasn't played some pretty good defensive ends the last couple of years as well.
Everything that Joe Alt needs to improve on is something that is easily fixed, right? We've talked about this. The core strength for Joe Alt, does that need to get better? Yeah, I think so. He can still add power to his frame, like no doubt about it. But the key is that is a simple offseason in a strength and conditioning program on the NFL level. That's all that is. All that is, because he plays with good bend, he's got length, and he's got overall great athleticism. That's the only thing. People point to a play, I think it was against JT Tuimoloau in Ohio State, where he gave up a little bit of grounds getting bull rush. And I'm like, guys, one, JT wasn't able to get off the block, right? Like he wasn't able to get off. Two, I could fix that. If Joe Alt was a lumbering athlete that isn't able to get to his 45 or his vertical step and gets beat around the track, I can't really fix that, man. I'm not going to make him a ton more athletic. I might be able to make him more flexible, but like I'm not increasing his foot speed at this point in his career that much on the next level. So core strength, I can improve. Technique, I can improve. But also, Joel's very technically sound for a kid that is his age. I mean, could it improve even more? Absolutely. But again, he has all the core competencies, all of the traits that you look at and say, those are all unteachables that I don't need to touch. The only thing that I need to touch is the teachable stuff, right? Getting stronger, getting, maybe having better hand play or more aggressive hand play at the top of a track. Like those things, I can improve upon those. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things that are God-given that I don't need to mess with. Joe Alt just has it.
Here's the issue with that kind of play too, Ryan. I don't need to fix that because and you're making a hypothetical. If that's a consistent issue, it's something I can fix.
Right.
But my point is when you're pointing to that one play, like there's like Xavier Worthy. If I wanted to say I question his hands, because I do, or I question his play strength, because I do, I could show you 10 to 15 snaps of that happening. In 3 years, you can show me one snap where that happened to Joe Alt, right? I could actually show you 2 snaps where he got driven back like that. One was against Louisville, where literally his left guard sticks his foot out and he hits that guy's foot and then loses his balance because he hits the guy's foot and gets driven back. And you're talking about a guy that's potentially going to be a first-round draft pick next year that they battled for an entire game. The reason that I said this, Ryan, is that it was a nitpick and not a real criticism is because you could only show me that one rep, and it wasn't even that bad, and Joe Alt won the rep because JT didn't make the play or didn't influence the play. If it was an issue, then you'd show me 5, 6 clips where that was an issue. And that's what I would watch last night. Whenever Lewis, because I watched the one with Lewis Riddick, because I very much enjoy Lewis Riddick, right?
Is that ESPN or Netflix?
It was the ESPN one, yes.
ESPN.
Like I couldn't do I can't do the ESPN one because I just can't listen to. I just can't do Pat McAfee and
I put it on mute, man. I don't even listen to anybody anymore.
I can't do NFL Network because I can't do Rich Eisen. But I thoroughly enjoy listening to Lewis Riddick and some of the guys there, so I can listen to. I can deal with Mike Greenberg because I respect those other guys. But the thing I like about Lewis Riddick is he tends to do a good job of pros and then a couple areas of concern. Right. And whenever there's areas of concern, he'll show you, 4 or 5 clips of it being an issue. And you can't do that with Joe Alt. You can't show me 4 or 5 clips where he's getting rocked back as a junior in college.
Right.
And that's the thing is like when you're just going to find one play in one game against a first rounder and say that's an issue, well, show me all the other 35, 40 times they were going toe to toe.
Right.
And tell me what happened.
Yep.
Because I saw Joe Alt play really well that game.
Yep.
And it wasn't even his best game. He wasn't even like at the top of his game in that game.
Well,
and that's what's nonsense to me.
I would just say too, when we're talking about offensive tackle play, especially on the NFL level, there's some guys that are super flashy, man. Like super flashy. They'll give you the plays every once in a while. But then we undervalue, and this guy was super undervalued, even though he's maybe the best left tackle I have ever seen. I mean, Orlando Pace is probably number 1, but like Joe Thomas is in the conversation, right? For what he did with the Cleveland Browns. And he was so underrated during his career with Cleveland because he just didn't lose reps. But it wasn't flashy. It wasn't driving guys off the ball and 7 to 10 yards downfield on run blocking and snatch trapping dudes to the ground and pancaking them. Like, it wasn't that type of stuff, but he just won reps. And that's just what Joe Alt is to me. Joe Alt is 1.5 inches tall. Well, actually probably more about 1 inch taller version of Joe Thomas. That's what I think he can be potentially. And I know that's compared to an NFL Hall of Famer, but I believe it.
When you take a guy number 5 overall, Ryan, there's an expectation that we're getting something that's going to be really good for the next 10 years, right? I mean, Joe Thomas was the number 1 overall pick, I believe, coming out, correct?
I think 2. I think he was 2.
Okay, so 1 or 2. He was picked really high.
Really high, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the fit, Ryan, with the Chargers, because this is where it gets interesting. And so Jim Harbaugh last night, I'm going to read you the quote from Jim Harbaugh. He was asked, or listen to the interview, he was asked at least 3 or 4 times about the position that he's going to play and, are they going to move all that? And so people were asking him about, I'm trying, like, okay, is obviously, you've got Rashawn Slater at left tackle and Joe Alt's going to be right tackle, right? And Jim Harbaugh very much, and this is kind of partly just who Jim Harbaugh is. He doesn't want to give you anything. But every time he answered it, he answered it similar to what I'm about to read now. He says, we don't know yet. Count on us playing our best 5 offensive linemen. What position each guy plays within the offense and within the offensive line is to be determined. And at one point, he did talk about how Rashawn Slater's their left tackle now, but it was sort of a for now type of conversation. So I am very curious to see kind of how this shakes out because he talked about how much they like Trey Pipkins and those type of things. And you and I talked about that before the show. That could just be posturing for trade value. I do think it's going to be interesting to get into this because I understand the notion that Rashawn Slater's a pretty good left tackle from what people say. I'm only speaking to this from what my evaluation of him coming out of high school was. I haven't seen much of him in the NFL. But Joe Alt's a significantly better left tackle prospect coming out than Rashawn Slater was. So my question would be, okay, and I'm going to ask you this, Ryan. I'm setting you up because I want to get your thoughts on it. Do you make the move now and move Rashawn Slater, or whether it be to left guard, you have a great left side, or to the right tackle, or do you have Joe Alt just turn into a right tackle? Because my theory being, I think Joe Alt can be an elite left tackle in the National Football League.
Sure.
And I feel like if you're going to pay a guy elite left tackle money, I'd rather pay Joe Alt that money in 5 years as opposed to Rashawn Slater in 2. I think it's 2, right? He's what?
Yeah.
He's in year 3.
Well, he's in year 3. So it'll be after this offseason, I believe, is when, or it might just be sometime soon. They'll try to be in front of it. But
just overall, your thoughts on that, but then also just the fit of Joe Alt with the Chargers, positional wise, but also what we know Jim Harbaugh to be. Because yes, he ran things a little differently in Michigan, but there's been a theme with Jim Harbaugh going all the way back to San Diego, the 1AA team, to Stanford, to the Niners, to Michigan. That's there was certain core foundations that went everywhere he went. Yes. And they're going to be true in Los Angeles as well.
It's such an interesting conversation because, I mean, I think that there's a lot of validity to playing Joe Alt at left tackle and moving Rashawn to right tackle, because I do think, one, fundamentally, I think that Rashawn is a better run blocker than what Joe Alt is now. And there's still, although the left tackle versus right tackle conversation has become a little bit more uniform, there still is some core values for a right tackle abides by, as far as being usually the more dominant run blocker, typically, right? So I think that would make sense because Joe does have a body that is much more left tackle centric than what you would think of compared to what Rashawn is at 6'4", over 300 pounds and 33-inch arms. Like, he doesn't exactly check the boxes of the look, but if I had to predict what happens, I would predict that Joe's going to play right tackle, is what I would predict, because I do think there's something to be said about a guy that's played left tackle in the NFL at a pretty high level. I mean, he's been one of the better left tackles over the last 2. Well, he's played 2 out of 3 because he got hurt as a second-year player, but he's been very good. He's been very good at left tackle. So I tend to think that they'll keep him at left and they'll move Joe Alt to right tackle, is kind of what I believe, just because of the veteran and the known commodity and all those things associated. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when I was at the Combine, every Charger media member out there asked the same question of Joe. How do you feel playing in a right-handed stance, man? Going over to right tackle, how's that feel? So if I had to predict a predictive nature, I would say that Joe Alt's probably going to be the right tackle of the near future for the Los Angeles Chargers, and they probably move Slater into left. Keep Slater over at left tackle. That's kind of my pulse. And then maybe Trey Pipkins is either a trade piece or he's a really good swing tackle potentially for the team, for a team that has needed better offensive tackle play for several years now. So I'll say he's over at right tackle, and that's kind of where we stay. Because at the end of the day,
stay, Ryan? That would be my follow-up. Is how long do you see that? Do you think that's for perpetuity? Do you think do they let Rashawn Slater walk in a year or two, free agent?
How long
does that last?
I don't think you'll let Rashawn just walk, because he's been a really good player for them. So I think they're going to invest in him potentially. I could be wrong about that, but I think that they invest him and they have Joe Alt on a rookie deal for a few years, and then they figure out the money down the road as far as hopefully keeping them together, because Rashawn's still a young guy, obviously, and Joe's obviously super young. So you could have your bookend for the next 8 years. I mean, you could have those guys together potentially. I just think that that's probably the most reasonable scenario. And I would also say this is that left tackle versus right tackle money, as far as second contracts, I don't think it will really hurt Joe that much, because right now, and I know it's going to change because the market's has been reset, but Penei Sewell is the highest paid offensive tackle in the NFL right now, and he's playing right tackle for the Detroit Lions. So that'll obviously be reset at some point. But right tackle money, my point is getting a lot closer to left tackle money than it was just 5 to 7 years ago at this point.
So let's wrap things up a little bit, Ryan, talking about what this means for Notre Dame. Obviously, Notre Dame has continued their tradition of just being a big-time offensive line unit. And I know that people say, well, this is another Harry Hiestand guy. And I'm like, yes, but let's give Jeff Quinn some credit here. And I gave Jeff Quinn, I banged on Jeff Quinn a lot, but this was Jeff Quinn's evaluation as a coach. Jeff Quinn's the one that identified Joe Alt and pushed for Joe Alt, even when there were much higher ranked players on the board. They loved Joe Alt. And obviously Jeff Quinn coached him as a rookie. So you got to give Jeff Quinn a lot of credit for this one and for identifying Joe Alt, landing Joe Alt, not having him go to his dad's alma mater, things along those lines. So, tremendous job by Jeff Quinn to identify Joe Alt. I'd say I question why it took 3 injuries for you to finally get him into the lineup as a freshman, but that's another conversation for another day.
Sure.
But look, it just continues a trend. We talked about it yesterday. Notre Dame has now had 4 of their last 5 left tackles are first round, or excuse me, it's 3 of their last 4 left tackles were first round picks. The non-first round pick was Liam Eichenberg, who was picked 42nd overall. So your last 4 left tackles have been very high draft picks. Notre Dame is, if you go back to when Zach Martin joined the NFL, was drafted 14, and you go to now, and I updated this with last night's numbers, Ryan. Notre Dame is currently 7th in total offensive linemen drafted into the NFL. Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, LSU, Georgia, and Oklahoma all have more. But Notre Dame is tied for 2nd with Georgia with the most first-round draft picks in that period of time, because obviously Quentin Nelson was also a first-round draft pick for Notre Dame in that time. Now you had Joe Alt for Notre Dame. You had Mims for Georgia and J.C. Latham for Alabama. Yep. Notre Dame and Alabama are tied when it comes to the most players taken in the first 3 rounds. So obviously Notre Dame can show the same draft power as anyone when it comes to offensive line. But we'll stick with that first, and then I'll give that other stat, Ryan. So I think it does matter when Georgia had a first-round pick and Tennessee had a first-round pick, or excuse me, Bama had a first-round pick, that Notre Dame has once again shown we're putting out first-rounders. But here's the interesting thing. The 3 of your first-round picks were not just first-rounders. They were the first offensive lineman taken in the draft. I believe Ronnie Stanley was the number 1 offensive lineman taken in the draft because Tunsil fell behind him. And I'm pretty sure Quentin Nelson was also the first offensive lineman taken in his draft class, wasn't he? Or was there a tackle taken in front of him?
I think he was the first one.
And then now, obviously, Joe Alt was I'll look it up while you're talking, Ryan. But that matters too. I mean, it does. You can't deny that not only are you producing for it's because it's one thing to say, hey, Notre Dame, we produced a first round draft pick in the last 10 years. And yeah, you went 20th. That's your claim to fame. You know what I mean? Like this other team's putting guys in the top 10. Right. And that's the difference is that right there. So, and yes, Quentin Nelson was the first offensive lineman taken. It was Baker Mayfield, Saquon Barkley, Sam Darnold, Denzel Ward, Bradley Chubb. Were all taken in front of him. And then Mike McGlinchey was the number 1 tackle taken in that draft class. You could even look at it that way. That 3 times they've had an offensive tackle was the number 1 tackle taken, and 3 times they've had the number 1 overall offensive lineman taken. That matters because it's not, we're not putting them in at 28, 29, 30 if you're talking about Notre Dame selling it. Right. You come here, whether you're a Harry Hiestand recruit or not, this is huge, and that's why I think it's important that Notre Dame doesn't sell this as a Harry Hiestand guy. Mm-hmm. They can sell it as a Jeff Quinn or a Joe Rudolph guy, because Joe Rudolph coached him just as much as Harry Hiestand did, because you can't sell what Harry Hiestand did as much because he's not here anymore. Right. And that's why I think it does move the needle for Notre Dame to say, hey, it's not just this is only a Harry Hiestand thing. Right. And I think that matters for Notre Dame in a big way.
Well, I think you should always keep the strength, right? I mean, obviously, we've talked about that. There's things that Notre Dame positionally needs to do better at from a recruiting perspective and from a development perspective moving forward. But one thing that you can always count from Notre Dame for is offensive line and tight ends on the offensive side of the football. And that needs to remain true. Like, you need to keep that because that is a separator compared to X program, Y program. Like, you are the standard at that position overall, speaking of offensive line. And I think it's even more important, Brian, to keep it a strength because Notre Dame's recruiting quarterback better now. They're recruiting running back at a very higher level. They've had some hits on wide receiver, although it needs to continue, moving forward here, right? So as the skill position gets better, and you're able to maintain the high level offensive line recruiting and development, hopefully moving forward, then that's where you can separate yourself, right? Because as you narrow the gap between Georgia and Notre Dame on the skill positions and, other great team and Notre Dame at the skill positions, and then the offensive line is the separator between the two or the difference maker between the two, that's where Notre Dame should technically have an advantage, right? So as you have positions that are more on an even playing field, offensive line should always be the thing that you can stand on and say, that's our bread and butter. And when the skill positions are more equal, that's when Notre Dame would hopefully more consistently win those big games and hopefully get over the mountaintop.
Ryan, that is a great point, because one thing that hurt Notre Dame during the previous coach's administration, and then this was also true of the Charlie Weiss era, is Notre Dame would get really good at certain positions, and then that particular year they'd take a step back somewhere else. So Notre Dame had really good defenses early in Kelly's tenure. Then all of a sudden they develop an elite offense in 2015 with great offensive lines, and their defense takes a big step back. And then there's years they've got great skill talent or really good skill talent, and then their offensive line takes a step back. And it just was, then the offensive line is elite in 2017, and the defense gets a lot better in 2017, like to where Mike Elko's got a pretty darn good defense over there, and the skill talent is terrible.
Right.
So it was always something missing. So to your point, don't upgrade at quarterback, upgrade at receiver, upgrade at corner, upgrade here, and then take a step back when it comes to offensive line coaching and development. Don't take a step back when it comes to tight end coaching and development. And I think that's a huge thing. And then we'll wrap it up with this, Ryan, because this is a fascinating point, and this is something that Notre Dame can sell. Notre Dame doesn't have as many first-round draft picks, or doesn't have as many overall draft picks the last 10 years as Ohio State, Bama, Michigan, LSU, or Georgia. They're close. They're 5 behind Ohio State. Actually, now they're 5 behind Bama, 2 behind Michigan, 2 behind LSU, 2 behind Georgia, 1 behind Oklahoma. But here's the fascinating stat. Number of all-pro honors of guys that were drafted in 2014 to now. Here's the number of all-pros that these programs have produced. And this is why I've said for a long time, the SEC linemen consistently get overdrafted. Notre Dame has had 14 all-pro honors from their linemen, 3 different players to do that. Nobody else has had 3 different players to do that. Ohio State, 3 all-pros from 2 players. One of them was an undrafted guy.
Who's that? Wait, let me guess. I feel like I know this. Center, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, man, what's his name? I know this one. Dang it. I forget.
You know it.
It will come to me eventually, but I give up at the moment.
Yeah, it was Andrew Norwell.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Norwell's still kicking around the NFL too, man. He's still kicking around.
I believe so. He was with he was with the Commanders, I think, a year ago or a year or two ago. I was looking at that the other day. But yeah, Andrew Norwell went undrafted in 2014. And then Corey Linsley's the other one. Norwell had 1 all-pro, and then Corey Linsley, who I think was a 4th or 5th round pick, had the others.
Yep.
Then you look at Oklahoma's had 2 from 2 players. Now, keep in mind, Oklahoma's had a lot with Trent Williams, but I'm talking about that were drafted from 14 to 24. Trent Williams was drafted before that.
Yep.
They've had 2 from 2 players. It was
Creed Humphrey.
Creed Humphrey was one, and then I forget his first name. The other Williams Darrell Williams had one.
Darrell Williams had an All-Pro. That's
1 year.
wild.
1 year as an All-Pro. Yep.
Interesting.
Alabama has had 1 All-Pro year. Ryan Kelly, 1 year.
Ryan Kelly's a good player.
Georgia has had 1 All-Pro year. It was Andrew Thomas a couple years ago, a second-team All-Pro. Yeah. And then Michigan had 1 year from Taylor Lewan. Mm-hmm. LSU has had 0.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, it's one thing to get drafted high. It's another thing to turn guys into impact players. And there was 1 year, and I think it was 2019. I think it was 2019 where Notre Dame had 3 former players that were first-team All-Pros on the AP list. Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin.
It's not bad.
So that
year was also, for some context, was maybe one of the best left tackle years anyone has ever had from Ronnie Stanley. He gave up folks, and this is not a misprint. I believe I remember the stat. He gave up 6 pressures in 16 games, not sacks, pressures the entire season. It's wild. He was that year, man.
Do you know what team is second in the most amount of All-Pro honors from their offensive linemen in this era, Ryan? Now, I'm not talking number of players, but just total number of All-Pros. You know, it's actually
Wisconsin?
no,
Hmm.
Nevada. Joel Bitonio's got 5 All-Pro
Ah,
honors in that time. But
interesting.
yeah, Iowa's has 3 from 2 players. NC State has 3 from 1 player. Wisconsin has 3 from 1 player.
Okay.
Wisconsin has 2 from 1 player. Oklahoma has so there's only 3 teams that have had multiple guys win All-Pro. Iowa had Tristan Wirfs and Brandon Scherf. Ohio State had the ones we talked about, and then Oklahoma had the ones we talked about. But Notre Dame has had 3 different guys earn All-Pro.
Nice.
And so it's not just, okay, yeah, we're putting you into the NFL, but these guys are getting big second contracts because they're going to the NFL prepared to thrive. And it's not just one guy. I mean, Mike McGlinchey's been injured a lot. He's still got a pretty nice contract from the Broncos last year.
Really nice one. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's the thing that's, Sam Mustipher is still kicking around the league because there's value in Notre Dame offensive linemen. And if Alex Bars didn't have the injuries he's had, he would have a much better shot to be in this. Tommy Kramer has started games in the National Football League, and he went undrafted. So it is really impressive that what Notre Dame has done, and now it's up to Joe Rudolph to continue it. But he's certainly going to be able to sell that. There's no doubt he's going to be able to sell that. And I believe he didn't. When was Ramczyk? How do you say his name? Did I say
Ramczyk.
Ramczyk?
Ryan Ramczyk.
When was he drafted? Do you remember?
I can't remember the year, but I know that Joe Rudolph worked with him for 1 year.
Okay.
1 year, I believe it was.
So he's got some guys he can look at and say, hey, I coached him. I coached Joe Alt.
Well,
So
and
that'll help him as well.
I would say this. I believe Ryan Ramczyk was like a Division II guy originally. And Rudolph, I mean, look, I don't know how much you give the credit to the previous coach, his first year at Wisconsin with Ryan Ramczyk, but I mean, he took a massive step forward. Like Ryan Ramczyk was not viewed as a potential first-round pick coming into his final year. Like he had a big year that year that kind of took him over the top.
So yeah, you can lay the foundation, but the other coaches got to. I mean, this is what we did with Harry Heastan last year, right? Like, hey, certain guys laid the foundation, but you've got to take it to the next step. So that certainly helps Joe Rudolph. There's no doubt about that, and he's had several other. I mean, let's be honest. Joe Rudolph went to Wisconsin in what was it? 15, 16. What was the year he went to Wisconsin? It was 2015.
15 sounds right. Yeah.
So during his tenure there, he had a 4th round pick. No, somebody offensive line. He had the 1st round pick in Ramczyk.
Yep.
He had a 3rd round pick in Michael Dieter, 5th round pick David Edwards, 4th round pick Tyler. Biadasz, right?
Biadasz. Yep.
He had Cole Van Lanen was a 6th round pick. Logan Bruss was a 3rd round pick, and then Joe Tittman a couple years ago was a 2nd round pick.
Joe Tittman's a good player too. By the way.
So I mean, so it's not like Joe Rudolph has got to only build on the legacy of Harry Heastan. Yep. He's got his own, and now you can add Joe Alt to that.
And you have to give him some credit for what the pipeline is for Wisconsin over the next year or two too. Right. Like Tanner Bortolini might get drafted today, who was one of his guys and that has been starting for multiple years. He also recruited Jack Nelson, who's probably going to be drafted next year. Who's the other? Oh, the right tackle's name always escapes me for some reason. Riley Mahlman. He might get drafted next year as well. So even a couple of these guys that are coming,
right? I mean,
yeah.
And I remember Notre Dame looked at him, and I actually saw him Now, let me just say, this is not at all to take away from Harry Heastan. Everybody knows I think he's a legend. He is, in my opinion, the best college coach of the last 15 years. It's simply to say it's important for Notre Dame to be able to have something to show besides just the great success that Harry Heastan showed. Because if it was only the success during his tenure, then it'd be much harder to say, but we're going to keep it rolling. Yep. And that's the point, to point out why it's important to point out that Joe Rudolph was not recruited by Harry Heastan. Go ahead.
Can I add one more too? Is that if you go back to Joe Rudolph's time at Pitt, he was also the guy that recruited Brian O'Neill, who is now a very good offensive lineman in the NFL. So he's got some guys.
And was a 1st round pick. So that's important. That's very important to have that, Ryan, to be able to develop that. And now it's about keeping it going. And so that certainly helps Notre Dame because offensive linemen are really different from a lot of other players. But the best of the best still have that desire to go somewhere they know they're going to get developed and be given an opportunity to go play professional football. I don't care this. They have different things that they care about than other players, but that's still something that's going to matter to a lot of these kids. And you know that for the last 3 years covering recruiting, it doesn't matter who it is, guys that have picked Notre Dame and guys that haven't, that still matters. It may not be the only thing that matters to them, where at some positions it does, but especially the top guys, it still matters. I want to be developed. I want to get a chance to play professional football.
I obviously don't know the number off the top of my head, but I would say about like 95% of the offensive linemen that Notre Dame recruits understands how important it is to, be potentially a part of that program and the lineage and the developments. Like they firmly understand that. I've only come across maybe one or two guys that are just like really deaf to what Notre Dame offensive line play has been over the years. And no shocker, a couple of those guys didn't end up having any traction with Notre Dame. And one guy's playing down in the University of Miami right now, which we won't talk about, but yeah. But keep asking me if he's visiting, guys. So visit at some point. Sure.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, let's kind of real quick before we move on. Obviously the number could continue. It could be another Jeff Quinn recruit will likely get picked, is going to get picked this weekend, could get picked tonight. So that number, that top 3 round Notre Dame pedigree could add another player tonight if Blake Fisher's able to get drafted. You still have Blake early round 3. I saw, I can't remember who it was. I think it might've been from The Athletic that had their day 2 mock draft that had him going late in the second round. So there's at least a chance that Blake Fisher gets picked tonight as well, Ryan.
I was looking at, I forget what site it was. It was ESPN or maybe it was The Athletic. It was someone that's reputable. And they had the top offensive tackle left on the board right now as Blake Fisher. And I was like, oh. Because if there's a demand, Brian, like there's a couple teams that did not get an offensive tackle in the first round that probably would have liked an offensive tackle in the
we
first
talked
round.
about that yesterday, Ryan. We talked about how he could become a guy that's a commodity if there's a run on offensive tackle in the first round. Because there is a bit of a drop off after those first few guys. And then when Dallas took Tyler Guyton late in the first round, and then Green Bay took just Joshua Morgan. I always want to say Jordan Morgan. Okay. That's the Michigan basketball player. They took Jordan Morgan. All of a sudden that run happened to where there was a couple guys that people thought would be maybe early second round picks. They're off the board now. Tyler Guyton we thought would be a first round pick. Whether he should or shouldn't have is a different conversation. But Jordan Morgan was the guy that I was seeing picked in the 30s and 40s on a lot of mock drafts. So to your point, when that happens, like I joked last night when Michael Penix went 8th, I was like, at this rate, Sam Hartman might be picked in the 20s. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you had 6 quarterbacks going the top 12. I was being sarcastic, but I think there is truth to it at offensive tackle, though, Ryan.
Well, no, and I would say there's truth to it at multiple positions. Is that you see teams every year pull out a weird pick in the first round and beyond that because they panic, man. They panic. I know what we might talk about Ricky Pearsall in the next one, the wide receiver out of Florida. Who I think we both agree is a pretty good football player. I like him. I think he would have been a very sound day 2 player, but I firmly believe that the run on wide receivers that we saw at the end there was like Ricky Pearsall. Now let's take Ricky Pearsall. And then you saw the Carolina Panthers trade back to 32 to take Xavier Leggett too. It's just like, I think teams panic in a lot of these situations, man. Chop Robinson being drafted by Miami. I think that was a little bit of a panic move after all 3 of the top edges were off the board. Teams panic all the time. It happens.
I think the Broncos did that with Bo Nix. There was a lot of talk that they loved Bo Nix, but they wanted to try to move back a little bit and get him. But you couldn't take that chance once Michael Penix got taken 8th overall. Because the thing is that the Broncos' saving grace could be if we fall back to around 20 and somebody takes Bo Nix, there's still Michael Penix sitting there.
Right.
Well, once he went 8th, it was like, well, there we go. But we'll get into that in the next section, Ryan. So obviously, we're Notre Dame has a chance to maybe hear a couple guys called tonight. Blake Fisher being one. We could potentially hear Cam Hart's name tonight. We could potentially hear Audric Estime's name tonight as well. So lots of potential action for Notre Dame prospects tonight. I think we're going to see a flurry of moves in the first 10 picks of the second round. I just have this feeling because I think what happened with the receiver draft got pushed back, to your point. There was a little bit of a panic run in the second round, but there's still a lot of really good wide receivers left on the board early in round 2 for teams that didn't get it. And then, as you said, there's some offensive linemen there as well. And some really good corners, I think, still left on the board. So we'll see how if that run starts. Cooper DeJean's still on there. Kool-Aid McKinstry's on there. Does that run start? Does that then push Cam Hart up? Does other positions run? That's the fascinating thing about the draft, and we'll look into that. We'll talk about that here in a little bit later. But before we get to section 2 of today's show, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, not just physically click the share button, which helps us and helps us with the algorithm and helps us grow our channel, But if you have Notre Dame friends and family that are not listening to the Irish Breakdown Show, you need to get them on to us. You need to help us out. We don't do any advertising. We trust you guys to share the word with other people about the job that we're doing here. We'd appreciate that. Give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform, Spotify, whatever that may be. We greatly appreciate that. And Ryan, I don't know if you had a chance to see this. I know you've been very busy today, but I did. You know that I did the play-by-play grades of the offensive line from the Blue Gold game. Yep. But I actually took them both and put them into one long document, and then also ranked top overall. I think it was 14 guys played. Just ranked them by grade, both teams together. Ranked them by grade, run blocking grade, pass blocking grade. You can only get that at Irish Breakdown, folks. I'm telling you. And there were some surprises. You know, like when you watch a game live, Ryan, and you're like, that guy did okay. And then you go back and grade it, and you're like, he had a 91%. I actually had a couple guys. I had to go back and rewatch the game because, like, I was like, no, there's no way that guy graded out that high because it just didn't feel like it. And then there's a couple guys that I thought played well that just their grade was a little bit lower because it's more of a did you do your job or not? It doesn't take into account did you dominate on this rep? Did you do your job from an assignment standpoint? And then I provided some analysis of okay, Billy Shroud didn't grade as high as other guys because he had a couple misses, but his dominant moments were really good. Rocco Spindler graded high and had dominant moments. And I'll give you all a little teaser. Rocco Spindler was my highest ranked offensive lineman or highest graded offensive lineman from the Blue Gold game. So do you know who finished in the top 4, Brian, in that? The guy that surprised me finished in the top 4? Christopher Tarek.
Christopher Tarek. Yeah, yes. I know you were high on his performance. I remember talking about that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he did his job. He just did a nice, solid job, which I was a little surprised because I didn't really notice him a ton watching live. You know, I had a couple nice power blocks here, but no, I'm sorry. Emil Wagner was my number 1 ranked offensive lineman. Rocco was second by 0.1. They were 0.1 apart, and it came down to Emil played 1 more snap than Rocco. So he played 62 snaps. Rocco played 1. So the percentage of it was a little bit different. So
neither one of those guys can run a fade route like Christopher Tarek, though.
No, they cannot. But Christopher Tarek was third in that one. So yeah, he did well. He did well. So anyway, check that out. You can only get that at the premium message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. We're gonna talk about just the first round in general. But thank you all for being with us for part 1 of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So part 2 of today's show, Ryan, we're going to talk about the first round in general. And we'll just kick things right off, man. I just want to dive right into just your overall thoughts on how the draft played out. Did you think it started off kind of playing out exactly how a lot of people had it, you know, and then around pick, I think 5, I think the Chargers kind of messed things up a little bit, taking Alt at 5, and then Latham goes at 7, but pick 8, obviously things went chaotic from there. But just overall thoughts on the first round, some observations you have just of what you saw last night.
I think my 2 biggest takeaways is, one, I thought there was going to be a lot more trades early on in the draft, and we didn't get that. It was more in the back end. We saw a little bit of movement, right? Like we saw the Minnesota Vikings move up to number 17, for instance. We saw Carolina trade back into the back end of the first round. So like we saw a few late movements, but overall, I thought that the trades would start happening in the top 10. And I thought that was going to be off of the quarterback demand, partly because I did not think, full transparency, I was ready for maybe one of Michael Penix or Bo Nix to be a first round pick, but one was not ready for both of them, and I was not ready for both of them in the top 12 selections. That shocked me. And I think that apparently, for right or for wrong, the NFL was higher on the quarterback class of a full top 5 to 6 than what the media was, what the talking heads were, what the mainstream analysts were. So that was my biggest surprise, was the quarterback demand was higher than I thought it was, or the supply people perceived it was higher than the demand was, apparently. And so I think that caused a lot of less movement because the position that people usually move up for are quarterbacks, and they didn't feel like they needed to, because you could just move up one spot to 10 and draft J.J. McCarthy. You could wait until 12 and get Bo Nix. And the Atlanta Falcons throw obviously the obvious wrench at number 8 and take Michael Penix. So that was kind of my biggest surprise, was just the supply, I guess, of quarterback was a lot more plentiful than, I guess, in the NFL's perspective than I thought it was going to be.
Well, the interesting thing about it, Ryan, is obviously we knew that quarterback was going to be a position where there was going to be at least 5 taken in round 1. I think both of us assumed that somebody, or at least there was a chance that somebody was going to take one of those 2 in the first round, like you mentioned. What was interesting is the Falcons' decision. Let's just dive into because I know that's one of the biggest things is you talk about the quarterback demand. Let's just kind of go through it real quick. Obviously, the Bears was a no-brainer. We knew that. Yep. Jaden Daniels going number 2. That's been kind of known for the last few days. Yep. Where it got interesting is, okay, what happens after that?
Yes.
That was where the intrigue was. There was a lot of smoke, and this is why we always tell people, don't listen to the stuff that you hear coming out leading into the draft. Because if you're working for an NFL team and you're telling people what you're going to do, then you're probably not good at your job. You have the number 1 pick, or you're trying to sabotage your organization. Usually you're telling people a little bit something different. There's all this smoke about how much the Patriots love J.J. McCarthy, all those type of things. Why? I think they were trying to see if they could get the Minnesota Vikings to bite and come up and get J.J. McCarthy, because the Vikings were also a team that liked him. But when they didn't, for whatever reason, didn't get the package that they thought, they went with Drake May, which I think was the right move, in my opinion. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But
sure,
I want to kick things off with the Michael Penix pick, because we talk a lot about panic, Ryan. Teams do things because of panic. This is not a panic move. This is we evaluated him and he was the best player on the board nonsense or whatever, because they just signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal that's fully guaranteed, $100 million fully guaranteed your first 2 years. And to say, well, we're going to let him sit for a while. The GM had the audacity last night to say that he may sit for 4 years. The dude's going to be 24 in a week and a half. You know what I mean? Like, that completely changed the entire complexion of the draft, because I think you'd have seen teams kind of moving back. You know, J.J. McCarthy was still on the board. You know, if he goes 10, then the Broncos might have gone back. There was a lot of talk last night that the Eagles are trying to move up and get one of the corners last night, because they were anticipating a corner run happening early. So people can say all they want that Penix was a panic pick, but there was no need for that pick. They just simply decided they wanted to take him. They thought he was the best player there. So I don't think it was a panic pick. I think it was just a really bad pick, in my opinion, in a lot of different reasons.
I think it's a bad process more than anything, because I just think that these things aren't cohesive, right? You mentioned it. You 4-year, $180 million deal. Yes, you can get out of the deal in 2 years if you feel like, right? But my question would be, what's the best case scenario for this pick to be worth it, right? What's the best case scenario? I think the best case scenario is Kurt is pretty good for 2 years, but he's 38 and you want to go with 26-year-old Michael Penix and you get out of the contract after 2 years. But I think that's so counterproductive, because although that might be good for the long term of the quarterback position, you're picking number 8 overall. You're not a good roster.
10 spots and still made that same decision.
Why are you giving Kirk Cousins $45 million a year and $100 million guaranteed if you are not investing in this roster now to try to win?
Right.
Why was that the move?
Yes.
They have a needed pass rusher. They have a needed corner. They have needs all over this roster. I mean, the offensive line's okay. They have a good running back. They could have used another wide receiver at some point in this draft as well. I just don't understand the windows that you're trying to hit right now. Like, are you trying to win right now? Why are you so willing to draft? And this is the point blank to it. Whether you like Michael Penix or not, because I do believe that Michael Penix could be productive in the right offense in the NFL. That is I actually have him I had him rated above JJ McCarthy. I'm okay with Michael Penix. But what are you trying to accomplish as a program? What did you just say? And then also, Kirk Cousins apparently didn't know about it. He was sideswiped by this. Yeah. So now you have potential to alienate your quarterback that is $100 million guaranteed in him over the next few years. I don't understand what the philosophy is here. I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, because you have holes in your roster. You're picking number 8 for a reason. And you just drafted a backup quarterback with the 8th overall selection. You just did that. That happens. You can't push back against it. Maybe it is insurance in case Kirk's injury is more serious than we thought, and maybe there's a setback.
But then don't sign Kirk Cousins to that deal.
Right.
That, like, if they would have kept Desmond Ridder and said, look, we're not a very good team. We have a lot of holes. There's no silver bullet out there for us at quarterback in the free agent market that's going to fix this thing. We got a brand new head coach. Let's give some patience to him. Let's go get this thing turned around. And look, with all the quarterbacks in the draft, there's going to be somebody at 8 that we can look at. And if they would have taken Michael Penix at 8 in that circumstance, I'd have said that's too high. But there's a lot to like about Penix. I have some issues. Like, I think Michael Penix was a heck of a college quarterback. I think he could be a starter in the NFL. I have some concerns about how good he can be. Sure. I think he's smart. I think he processes information exceptionally well. I think he's got a strong arm. The issues that I have, he's got a long release, and he's not great with ball placement. And for a guy that's a fifth-year senior, like Jaden Daniels had some issues with ball placement early in his career, but by his 4th and 5th seasons, he was pretty good in that regard. You know what I mean? Michael Penix always still had those issues, and so that's 2 bad things to have in the NFL: long release, not great ball placement. Right? So even though I like him a lot, there's enough issues there to say 8's too high. But if they wouldn't have signed Kirk Cousins all that money, take Michael, because this is what the Bears did, right? I mean, look, we're going to take a quarterback in the first round. So let's go, trade for Keenan Allen. Let's go sign, this guy. Let's get DeAndre Swift. Let's take Rome Odunze at 9. The Falcons went out, spent $50 million a year for the next 2 years on an older quarterback who may only have 2 good years left. And now you're not going to spend money to put pieces around him. You're not going to spend draft capital to put pieces around him.
Yeah.
That's the thing that doesn't make a lot of sense. So the Penix pick by and of itself, I would have called it a reach.
Yes.
So look, I like the player, but that's a reach at number 8 if they didn't sign Kirk Cousins. But now it makes no sense with the context of what they've done. It just was a very, very poor pick, in my opinion.
Well, and if they are being truthful, and again, these press conferences, don't believe most of what people say, right? But if he's being truthful and he actually they intend on 28-year-old Michael Penix is the starter now, right? For the first time. That is because some people will say this, and someone did say this to me. It was like, well, Green Bay drafted Jordan Love as the heir apparent, and he waited for 3 or 4 years. He was the 26th overall selection. Right. And also, Green Bay has a very good track record of doing what Atlanta's trying to do, but not doing it in a spot where it doesn't make any sense. They drafted Aaron Rodgers in the late first round. They drafted Jordan Love in the late first round. They invested a 2nd-round pick, I think, in Brett Favre to trade for him for the Atlanta Falcons back in the day.
Who's also 21 years old, Ryan.
Right.
Like right now, Jordan Love, who was picked in 2020, is 25 years old. Right now.
Yep.
Michael Penix right now is 23. He turns 24 in the May 8th.
Yep.
So that's a huge difference. You took a 21-year-old guy from a group of 5 program that had a lot of tools but needed work in the 20s, to your point. Yep. They took about to be 24-year-old guy who, again, you and I both like. This isn't so much about Michael Penix. It's about the Falcons.
It's the process.
It's about the Falcons. Exactly. Yeah. You took a guy about to be 24. You're going to sit him until he's 26. So you're not going to start his clock until he's closer to 30 than he is to 20. That's the difference. Jordan Love finally gets the keys to the castle handed to him at the age of what? 24 years old, because he didn't turn 25 till later in the year. 24 years old, he gets the keys to the kingdom handed to him after sitting for 3 years. 2 years. No, 20, 21, 22. So basically 3 years.
Yep.
If you sit Michael Penix for the same period of time, he's 27 years old.
Right.
That's a huge difference. That means he's 2 years older than what Jordan Love was when he took the Packers to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge difference.
And again, the Atlanta Falcons are not a team in position to take these types of luxuries at 8, in my opinion. Right. They're just not. They haven't been a good football team in several years. And then your first year now under Raheem Morris, you're going to say, I'm taking a backup quarterback at number 8. It would have made more sense. I still think it would have been a dumb selection and a flawed selection if they would have, like, let's say Drake May falls to 8, right? And they're like, I'm going to invest in Drake May, who's 21 years old, and we'll do that track. It would make more sense, but I still think it's a flawed opinion. I still think it's a flawed process because, again, you are not in a position as a team. The Green Bay Packers, who have historically been a successful franchise year in and year out, playoff contender, they can draft a luxury pick at 26 in a future starting quarterback potentially. You, as a Atlanta Falcons team who has not been a good team the last few years under Arthur Smith, you cannot afford a luxury at the number 8 overall selection. Why are we throwing around top 10 picks like they're luxuries? It's not a luxury pick for you, sir. You drafted a backup quarterback with number 8 overall pick.
Right.
You did that. There's nothing else I could say about it. You drafted a backup quarterback at number 8.
And I think take away my opinion of JJ McCarthy for a second. I would have understood that one, because you're talking about a 21-year-old kid that needs time. Like, that's the thing that we said about, if JJ can go to a place where they can sit him for a year and let him cook for a little bit, then, you're okay. I get that. Because a lot of these teams, here's my thing, Ryan, I'm okay with some of these teams reaching a little bit if they truly believe a quarterback is worth it. Because, hey, he's not going to help you right now. That's fine. I understand that, because you're picking in the top 10. The odds of you becoming a Super Bowl team next year and the next 2 years are not great anyway, because you're picking in the top 10. You have a lot of problems. I'd be okay. We're going to get this franchise quarterback. We're going to put him in the oven and let him cook for a little bit. You know what I mean? While we go do some other things around here. And this, we've seen teams have that success doing that. But you don't see teams normally do that with a 24-year-old. You don't normally see teams do that with a guy that they just spent $180 million on. And this isn't even a defense of Kirk Cousins, because I think Kirk Cousins' best football is way behind him. And his best football was good, but it was never like when the Rams got Matt Stafford, you're thinking they might go win a Super Bowl now. And they did.
In a better situation, Matt Stafford's an elite NFL quarterback, right? In a bad one, he still is pretty good with the Lions.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly. So there's a lot about it that didn't make sense, right? And again, if you just take out the context of the scenario, it's a reach of a guy that we both like.
Well,
and the context is what makes it just really bad.
And you have a 36-year-old quarterback that's coming off of an Achilles injury, right? And you're going to supplement that with a young soon-to-be 24-year-old quarterback that's had 3 season-ending injuries. It's not like he has a clean bill of health where you're just like dependable. 2 wrongs don't make a right. You know what I mean? Like
again, take a JJ McCarthy who has very little tread on those tires. It just, and who has the mobility to kind of maybe go in on a team that's not that great and overcome some early issues. But that really shook things up, because I think the Broncos got into panic mode at that point in time and took Bo Nix at 12. And all of a sudden you're seeing the draft just completely shook up. I think the position that got obviously impacted the most by that was the cornerback position. Yeah. I think the cornerback position got just destroyed, like just pushed down 10 spots minimum by those moves.
Yes.
In my opinion. So I think that was an interesting one. So the quarterback one was wild, Ryan. We saw a lot of offensive linemen get taken in yesterday's draft as well. That one was more expected. We kind of knew that one was coming, and I think there was a lot of good players taken on the offensive line. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 offensive linemen were taken yesterday in the first round of the draft.
How about, it's a wild number. But you're right. It was expected, right? Like we knew a couple of those guys were going to sneak in there late because of the demand at the position, because offensive line play in the NFL, not great right now. Yeah. I mean, every team could use an upgrade at least one spot. It's really at that dire of a strait. How about this one? I don't think we talked about this one on the phone yesterday. A defensive player was not selected until number 15 overall pick, 14 straight to start the draft. I thought it was going to be like 7 or 8 picks in until we got the first defensive player, or 8 or 9 picks in.
I think we both had the Falcons taking
Turner
in our mock drafts at number 8. A lot of other people did as well.
I thought it was going to be Turner, or it was going to be a corner, best corner available if they don't trade back. But yeah, man. I mean, again, I knew that it was a top-heavy offensive class. I expected that to happen.
A record, 23. Yeah. That's an all-time record. Wild. The previous was 19, I believe. It had been set a couple times, but just blew the record away, 23. There was a tight end taken in, no running backs taken in yesterday's first round, no safeties taken in yesterday's first round, and no off-ball linebackers. I believe I'm correct on that, right? I know that a couple of these guys are considered linebackers, but they're not off-ball linebackers, right? I know Dallas Turner's considered a linebacker. I think some people call exactly, they're edge players. Yep. No off-ball linebackers taken in yesterday's draft either.
Nope.
So I thought that was interesting. So 15 of the 32 picks were either a quarterback or an offensive lineman. So I thought that was really interesting. And then there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wide receivers.
It's wild.
So, yes.
Yeah. And we're about to see a run on wide receivers, I think, in early day two as well. So
I honestly think, Ryan, the top 10 picks are going to be more than half of them are going to be, if not 70% of them are going to be receivers and corners. I really think we're going to, because if you need a corner, you're sitting there. Cooper DeJean is still sitting there. Yep. If you're a corner needy team. Yeah. So it's going to we'll get into day two. I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, Ryan. So let's talk about, even though there was a lot of head scratchers last night and there was a lot of things that went in a different direction, I still think a lot of teams helped themselves last night, and even some teams that maybe I don't think helped themselves because of my evaluation of a player. I think they did the process well, and we'll get into those, Ryan. So let's just kind of start off with just some picks that we liked. I want to get your thoughts on the Bears to kick things off, Ryan, because I personally liked what the Bears did. I understand them taking Caleb Williams. I have a lot of appreciation for his talent. I have some questions about some other aspects of him, but the talent is too good for me to pass up. And then they just let the draft kind of fall to him at 9 and take a franchise receiver. Because I know people say, well, they've already got Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. DJ Moore's getting up there in age. Keenan Allen's already on the downside of his career. You don't need a Rome Odunze to come in and be that dude in year 1. He gets to learn from a couple professionals, but you now have a tandem of young players. Cole Kmet's still very young, even though he's been in the league for several years. He's young. You've now got a very young wide receiver, and that's what smart franchises do. The Bears are not a smart franchise yet. They have a lot to prove to me, but I think the Bears have. I know there's a lot of people that like to bag on Ryan Poles. I think overall he's had a pretty good offseason so far. And I think last night's draft was just a continuation of that, to be honest.
Well, they were a big beneficiary. It's funny enough is in theory, I guess, technically, they started the quarterback run, right? You took the first one at the first pick, and then there was a high quarterback demand after that. 3 of the first, the 3 picks, and then you saw Penix and JJ. I think them, though, technically starting the quarterback run, funny enough, gave them Rome Odunze, because I think that there was a chance that number 4, Cardinals, number 5 with the Los Angeles Chargers, and number 6 with the New York Giants, like those are all extremely wide receiver needy teams. And I would not have been shocked if we went wide receiver 4 through 6, bang, bang, bang. And then if you're at number 9, then you are in the situation, if you're the Bears, of, do I take Brock Bowers then? Or do I trade back? Like, what do I do there?
And there were some left tackles on the board there still for them. Olu Fashanu was on the board still. Brock Bowers, to your point, is on the board. There, Dallas Turner was on the board, or trade back. I mean, so they were actually, I think that 9 spot, because of, and I think you nailed it perfectly, the run that was going to happen at quarterback, which they started, really put the Bears in a great position of either there's a guy that's going to fall there that we really like, or if there isn't, then somebody that's looking for a quarterback, an offensive tackle, is going to be willing to give up their weight in gold to get up there and get them. And I thought they handled the process really well.
Yeah, they did. I think so. Because Rome Odunze, this was a poorly kept secret as well, but the Bears have liked Odunze for a long time. Like, that was a guy that they really like. Did you see the video of Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze after Rome was picked? I mean, they have had like this weird friendship leading up to the draft. Like, they've been throwing together and doing all this type of stuff. They were on like the same plane to visit the Bears, I think, for their top 30 visits as well. Like, there's this weird friendship. So I think that was about as best case scenario as you possibly get. I mean, you got a really talented wide receiver that brings a different element to the offense that you don't have enough of, right? Like, DJ Moore, again, is that explosive, but he's more of a yak guy that's kind of a move inside out type of dude. You have Keenan Allen, who's the older, kind of crafty slot type player, but you don't really have a guy outside that is a separator. I mean, they want to Chase Claypool to be that guy, and unfortunately he was not that guy. So getting a guy like a Rome Odunze to pair with the different types of receivers that they already have, I think it's about compartmentalizing traits and putting a good wide receiver room together, and I think that they do have that. And honestly, I'm not a big Matt Eberflus guy as far as a head coach is concerned, but the Bears have a chance to compete this year, man. They do. Offensively, they should be pretty good.
And if they don't, you need to, it's time to move on.
Yes.
That's the thing. Like there's no more excuses for the Bears. Now, I'm not saying the Bears are a Super Bowl team, but they should be competitive this year. And if you don't show a nice jump this year, then you know that you don't have the right guy leading your franchise.
I agree.
And so we'll find that out, Ryan. Do you want to talk about just your overall thoughts about the landing spots for the quarterbacks before we go on to some of your the picks you like, Ryan? You just want to kind of dive into that. So Jaden Daniels goes number 2 to the Washington Commanders. Drake May goes number 3 to the Patriots. What were your thoughts on those two picks?
I think the Washington Commanders is actually not a bad spot for Jaden overall. Look, the offensive line needs some retooling moving forward, and I think that obviously that would probably be the point of attention on day 2 moving forward here. But they have a couple of really talented weapons. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. I like a lot of what they have as far as wide receivers are concerned. I think that, look, Cliff Kingsbury is a terrible head coach, but I think the guy's a good offensive coordinator. Yeah. I think he can do that, right? So I think that strategy, and also I think that Jaden Daniels is a pretty good fit into his system. I do think that it structurally will work well. So I expect Jaden Daniels to have a pretty solid rookie year, and then hopefully by year 2, he's starting to really catch on and catch his fire a little bit. Drake May, I think this is going to be about mental resolve for Drake May, because that is not a great situation to be in, right? It's not. I think New England, if they were going to take a quarterback at 3, made the right decision without question. But offensive line needs retooling. Wide receivers, not very good right now. I mean, they need an offensive identity and they need talent on offense. So this is going to be one of those situations where, do you let Jacoby Brissett be the starting quarterback for this year and let Drake just kind of ease in? Or do you throw Jake to the fire early and just say, like, hey, man, you just got to come out on the other side and we'll grow together. You'll make mistakes. It'll be a little bumpy, but we'll get to the other side together. It's going to be fascinating to see just what their plan is for Drake, because I'm not sure if they're going to let him sink or swim, or if they're just going to let him kind of be a observer early on. I'm very interested to see what they do with him.
And we don't know, because it's a new head coach. Jared Mayo's never been a head coach before, so I'm very curious to see how it goes. My strategy is I've always been a fan of, especially with a young guy like Drake May, who's young. He's a true third year guy. Side note, that was the fascinating part about this draft. What the quarterbacks was, it was basically like 2 completely different types of quarterbacks. It was either like really young, true juniors, or really old. Because we talked about Michael Penix being old. Bo Nix is already older is already 24.
Yep.
You know, and so it was just very weird. Like there's these really young kids. You know, Michael Penix is really young. Caleb Williams is a very young, true junior. You've got Drake May's a true junior. JJ McCarthy's a true junior, barely 21 years old, these guys. And then there's these 3 old dudes, and Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix and Bo Nix. And you can thank COVID for that, because Penix and Nix would not have been in college. And Jay Daniels, none of them would have still been in college if it wasn't for COVID. Yep. I'm pretty sure of that one.
I think someone put in the chat earlier that Jaden Daniels threw a game-winning touchdown to Brandon Ayuk against Justin Herbert, just for some context of like how long he's been in college.
Right. Yeah. Justin Herbert's not a rookie. He's been in there for
he's going into year 4, right? In the NFL. So
exactly. Drake May to me is an interesting one, Ryan, because I still believe he's the guy for me, that if the Patriots are a well-run organization moving forward, he's the guy that I like. He's my guy. He's the guy that I would have taken. I love Drake May. Yep. But I think my thing is, you've got to let him cook for a minute. Even if you want to play him this year, don't start him week 1 or 2. Let Jacoby Brissett kind of take some of those early arrows, to where once Drake does step in the lineup in year 1, if you go that route, there's not as much pressure on him. Let him learn. Let him see how the NFL game goes. Let him see, because Jacoby Brissett's a pro. He's been in the league for a minute. He knows how to be a leader. He knows how to game plan. He knows how to handle the NFL like a pro. I think having Drake learning behind a guy like that, at least for a time, because you're not going anywhere this year, and the risk you run with a guy like him, because here's why I say that, Ryan. Every situation is different. And with this particular situation, the reason I strongly believe they need to do that, just beyond my normal, that's my tendency to do that, is because Drake already is a bad habits guy.
Yep.
Drake in college has a lot of bad habits that need to get worked out of him. Playing on a bad team is only going to enhance those bad habits. playing on a team with a shaky offensive line and not great pass catchers is going to only enhance and build and solidify those bad habits. I think you need to let him sit for a little bit, work on those technical parts of the game, and then maybe down the road in the season you play him, or you go into next year with him where you've been able to kind of rebuild your roster. You're going to get another high draft pick. It's kind of tanking, but not really. I mean, you're trying to win. You're just not necessarily putting your stud quarterback out there to have to go through that. That's would be my preference for Drake, because I do worry about if it gets off to a bad start, he may not be able to recover from it.
Well, situations and quarterbacks is always a great conversation because New England Patriots, if both Jaden Daniels and Drake May were on the board, I would defer to Drake for New England because I think that you need to maximize windows for players. I do think Jaden he's more ready to play in the NFL today than what Drake is, right? So for Washington, might be a better fit for them because they're a little bit further along from an offensive skill position perspective. But
don't
Drake,
they kind of think they're in a position where if with a good offseason, we can compete a little bit for the playoffs? That's kind of the impression I get from the Redskins or the Commanders and the moves they've made, to your point, where they do need to kind of have a bit of a plug and play quarterback. So you're right. It does make more sense for them to take Jaden.
I think the Commanders are a lot closer to any type of contention than what New England is right now. Just how bad the New England offensive roster is. It's really bad.
It says a lot that when Washington's in a better position to win than your team is, it says a lot about where your franchise is.
Yeah, seriously. Since Joe Gibbs left, pretty much, right? So it's been rough.
That's
but honestly, for New England, I think Drake May is the right guy for them because he's young. Your window of winning is 2 to 3 years away if you ever even get there. And I think that's when you maximize it. 24-year-old Drake May is when you really want to maximize him.
Right.
Jaden Daniels at 27, that gives you less of a time. You're shortening your window of being a really good team, also having a really good quarterback. So I think having a young quarterback in a situation where you're not in a rush, you are in a rebuild, I think that makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah. All right, Ryan, we talked about Penix. I just want to kind of finish up with this. Thoughts on Bo Nix?
I said this to Joe on the podcast that we recorded earlier. I think he actually agreed with me. I actually kind of like Bo Nix's fit with Sean Payton and Denver. I kind of like it. I don't like it at 12, right? That's the conversation. I would have much rather it happen in the second round than I do at number 12.
Or even in the 20s where you picked up some extra draft capital. That's the thing I said, or I'm glad you said that. I'm glad we're on the same page there because for me, I really like that fit. I think the system that Sean Payton runs and Bo Nix and the Broncos need a quarterback that can play now. Yes. Because otherwise they're rolling with Jarrett Stidham or Ben DiNucci next year, which is not good. Yep. So you get a guy that can come in and play now. You got to get a guy that's a leader, a guy that has had the weight of the world on his shoulders since he was a senior in high school because of who he was and his name and all this other kind of stuff. So you're getting a lot of that. And to be a quarterback in Denver, you've got to handle that because it used to be you just had to live up to the John Elway legacy. Now you have to live up to the John Elway and the Peyton Manning legacy. Right. So there's a lot on that guy. I don't mind the fit at all. I like the fit. I had him. When I would do those fun draft simulator mocks we can trade, I would constantly say, how far can I trade down and still get Bo Nix? But the problem is the Broncos have a lot of holes, and they could have moved down a little bit, maybe get some thirds and fourths, maybe even a second, depending how far you want to go. And then you take a Bo Nix in the 20s, which you and I agree. You and I have had a lot of disagreements on Bo Nix over the years. I've liked Bo Nix for a while. I think Auburn ruined him to a degree or didn't use him. But still, he's not a top 15 pick. I mean, he's just not. I'd have taken him in the 20s. I'd have been okay taking him in the 20s. But taking him at 12, that's my issue, right? It's the value for where you got him. The pick I don't mind. The person I don't mind. It's where you got him. It's like Daniel Jones. I had a buddy of mine. I said, if the Giants would have taken Dexter Williams in the top 10 and Daniel Jones where they took Dexter Williams, I wouldn't have had as much of a problem with it.
Dexter Lawrence. You got Dexter Williams on the mind.
What I say, Dexter Williams. I wouldn't have had as much of a problem with it. But you take him 6, there's going to be an expectation. Because Sean Davis and I were talking about this before the show, Ryan. And we're talking about Jared Goff and how I think he's perennially underrated in the NFL. And Dak Prescott keeps getting hyped up in the NFL. And I've said to Sean for years, the reason why is because Jared Goff was taken number 1 and Dak was taken in the 4th round. And when you're taking number 1, there's an expectation. So now a guy that's been to a Super Bowl and now an NFC championship game is considered a bust. where a guy that's he's like won one playoff game his whole career is considered this top quarterback. Well, why? Because Jared Goff's expectations were significantly higher. Where Dak, it's like he's outplayed his draft position, right? And so that's the thing is you have to look at that. And with Bo Nix, it's like you're getting a guy that you think is going to be a franchise quarterback, when in reality you're getting a guy that could be a good leader if you put the right pieces around him. But now they're not going to they don't have the capital or the money because of how they handled Russell Wilson to now put the pieces around him. And how quickly can you do that with a guy that's already 24 years old?
I believe, if I remember correctly, I think I literally gave Denver Bo Nix on day 2.
Yes, you did.
In the mock draft.
Yeah.
So I like the fit. Sean Payton, look, he's an egotistical guy. He's kind of hard to work with, all that type of stuff. But the dude's an offensive genius. Like, let's be honest with ourselves about that, man. The dude knows how to run an offense. And the one misconception, I think, when he was in New Orleans, everyone thought of Drew Brees as this like stationary quarterback. They rolled him out all the time, man. They got him on the move a ton. He threw really well on the move, actually. And I think that Bo Nix fits that very well. And I think stylistically it makes sense. I think Bo Nix could be very productive in Denver if they're able to put enough pieces around him. Do I think he's an elevator? No, I don't think he's an elevator. So I wouldn't have taken him at number 12 in a vacuum. Do I like the fit with Denver, though? Yes. Do I like the value of him at Bo Nix at 12? No. Just
very
simply,
fair.
I do not.
Here's a team, Ryan, before we get into the rest of the picks, because we're going to wrap up with quarterbacks. But take the evaluation that I have of J.J. McCarthy aside, and the one that you have, because neither of us view him as being a top 10 pick right now. I still would have loved to see him go back to college. I think he could have been a top 5 pick next year if he would have gone back to college for a year. But that's a different conversation for a different day. There was a lot of smoke that the Vikings were a team that were calling into the top 5, trying to get into the top 5, and it wasn't a hidden secret that they liked J.J. McCarthy. The fact that they didn't panic and overpay to move up to get their guy. Only moved up one spot to get him, and then use that extra capital to go up and get Dallas Turner. To me, I thought they handled the draft pretty well. We could debate the player but that's an evaluation thing. They are convinced that he's that guy, and I think the manner in which they were able to get him, and the Falcons did them a huge favor by taking Michael Penix, because now you're in a position where you can let that draft fall to you, and you move up one spot. And I did have a couple people say, why would they move up one spot? The concern is that teams like the Raiders and Broncos are now within striking distance of moving up to get him if he was their guy.
Because clearly, who had number 10 pick to start? It was
the Jets.
The Jets.
They weren't taking a quarterback, right?
And clearly the Jets were a trade back candidate because literally they traded back. So obviously they were at least working the phones there. And I would say this, though, like Minnesota, look, I have my doubts about J.J. McCarthy as far as being an elevator and being that dude, franchise quarterback, all that type of stuff. But if he does maximize his potential, Minnesota is about as good of a landing spot as you're going to find from a skill position, offensive tackle perspective, man. Like, they have Christian Darrisaw at left tackle. They have Brian O'Neill at right tackle. You're going to be protected very well as they continue to retool the interior. But then also Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, like Tyler Hawkinson when he gets back healthy from the injury late in the season. Like, you got some weapons, dog. Like, you should be able to come in and do some things, at least, you know. And the great thing is that JJ doesn't have to come in and be a hero, right? Like, he has to come in and distribute to some really talented players, and that is maximizing JJ McCarthy. So JJ McCarthy, I think that the Minnesota Vikings was probably the best landing spot for any quarterback. I think you could argue between Chicago and Minnesota now. Like, I think that they both have merit of an argument, but I think Minnesota is certainly a very good landing spot for a quarterback short term.
Here's another piece of that, Ryan. If JJ is able to kind of emerge over the next year or two as the guy, what's one position offense they're not great right now? It's running back. We have a mobile quarterback that can kind of do some damage with his legs, so you don't necessarily have to depend on your running backs all the time to, A, protect him, but also to be able to utilize them, you know, with their legs. And so I think that helps them a little bit.
And no running back drafted in the first round, so we can see if they can fill that hole sometime.
There's good backs there in round 2. Yeah. So Ryan, let's just kind of start to finish, and just let's go through the first round. And just kind of give some evaluations of some picks that we really liked.
Okay.
And I'll let you kick things off.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's actually a lot I liked throughout this draft. I mean, I thought the Las Vegas Raiders one was an interesting one with Brock Bowers, but I wanted to start off, and with my fandom, I guess, here, The Los Angeles Rams at number 19 picked Jared Verse, the defensive end edge player from Florida State, which I thought, first and foremost, there was some smoke, and I was told that it's actually legitimate smoke, that the Rams wanted to trade up potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the trade up, no one knew exactly what it was for. There was some Brock Bowers rumors. There was some Byron Murphy rumors, but it may have been they wanted to make sure that they got their edge that they wanted, because I think they thought originally that Dallas Turner was going to go to Atlanta at 8, and they might have to get up to make sure they got who they perceived to be the best edge in the class, Jared Verse out of Florida State. But luckily for the Rams, they were able to stay at 19 because Laiatu Latu was drafted by the Colts with the 15th overall selection. So Jared Verse ended up being the third edge off the board. And for me, he ended up as a top 10 player in this class, and you got him at 19. That, for one, is value. The other thing I really love about this is that because people been penciling in Byron Murphy or sometimes Jerzon Newton to defensive tackles. Obviously, Aaron Donald just retired. You need a new defensive tackle, right? I love that they didn't go that route, because 1-to-1, you are not replacing Aaron Donald. You're not going to. I would rather do a committee approach or find someone on day 2 to take those snaps, because regardless of who you were drafted, Byron Murphy, Jerzon Newton, or anybody else at 19 at defensive tackle, you're going to be a loss of production. You are going to be a down as far as getting worse at a position. It's going to happen. We're talking about a Hall of Famer and one of the best defensive tackles to ever play the game. But you know what they could have done, Brian, in my opinion, was they could have upgraded one of their edge spots. And they did that here. They upgraded a position. They upgraded it ultimately. And I think that Jared Verse was tremendous value at 19.
I think that's the way you have to look at it, Ryan, is could they have gotten a defensive tackle that you'd have been happy with? Yeah, I mean, there's some guys there, that they could have taken that you're like, okay, I mean, they fill a need. Nice player. I know we talked about that yesterday. But it's like, do you take a player for the higher need that's the lesser player, or do you take the better player that's not quite the same need but is still a need? Right. I think you always take the better player over the bigger need, especially when that better player is at a position where you'd still like to upgrade. It's not, and that's kind of the way I look at it. So to me, I like the pick. I did, and I'm higher on Jared Verse. Jared Verse gets a lot of criticism. My only concern of him, I know people say he's a little tight, but he's a different kind of edge rusher than Dallas Turner. So I don't, he's a power guy. He's an old school, he's the kind of edge rusher that I grew up watching. The Michael Strahans, the Reggie Whites, the Bruce Smiths. His game is more about, he's not the same size as those guys, but his game's more about power. I mean, he had 2 or 3 sacks in the last couple of years where he literally didn't touch the quarterback. So how to get a sack? Because he literally drove the offensive lineman into the quarterback and knocked the quarterback down with his own lineman.
Against a couple good linemen too, man, that he did that too. I know he was a true freshman at the time, but Will Campbell's probably going to get drafted pretty high next year from LSU, and he made him look like a child when he played against him in his first game. And I know it's, a third-year player versus a freshman. I get that, but you're also talking about a kid that came from Albany, and it was his first Power 5 football game ever as well, right? So, yeah, I look, is he going to bend the track as well as a Dallas Turner? No. But can he affect up the track as much as Dallas Turner? I think he can, because his first step is wicked, man. And he's a 4-5 athlete. He can threaten outside corner, and then he's got the power and inside counters where he can finish at the quarterback. So I think Jared Verse is a tremendous player. Now combining him with Byron Young that they drafted out of Tennessee last year, who had 8 sacks. They also had Kobe Turner, who had 9 sacks. As quietly, Aaron Donald was only second on the team in sacks this past year. Kobe Turner, rookie defensive tackle, actually had more sacks than Aaron Donald this past year. So it's going to look different without Aaron Donald. But I think the good thing about the Rams is that they're okay with difference. They didn't force the defensive tackle because that's how they've always been structured the last 10 years. They went different. And I think it's good to be able to evolve when you lose a player like Aaron Donald, because you're not going to be able to do the same things you're able to do with Aaron Donald. You have to change a little bit.
I had there was a pick that I liked in the top 10, Ryan, that I think could be a boom or bust pick. But I like the process. There was a lot of talk about the Giants taking an offensive tackle, which I'd have been okay with at 6. But once Alt was gone, I don't know that there was one was good enough. There was talk of them maybe taking a quarterback. They like J.J. McCarthy. There were even some mocks that had them moving up to take J.J. McCarthy. They stayed put at 6 and got Malik Neighbors. And the reason I like this move is because I know Malik's got a reputation as being a bit of a volatile guy, not coachable, but like that's welcome to wide receiver in the National Football League the last 30 years. You know what I mean? Like, but here's the deal. You're going to have a much better chance at finding out who Daniel Jones is now. And if he is your guy, okay, you've invested this money at him, and in 3 years, that money's going to look like well spent money when you consider how much money quarterbacks are going to be making by then, right? Number one. Number two, if he isn't the guy, you get out of that contract for a much cheaper way next offseason. And the guy you hire, you now have a franchise wide receiver to pitch to him to say, hey, look, we got the pieces. We just need the guy. And so in a lot of ways, I actually really liked what the Giants did. And I think he was the best player available at that spot. So it filled a need. You got the best player in the draft at that spot, in my opinion, and who I think you could make it. I would at least say it's debatable that Malik Neighbors, if his head's on straight, could be the best receiver come out of this draft. I think there's a chance that could be the case.
Sure.
And you've now said we're going to build around our young franchise quarterback and see if he's that guy. That was one of my. It's not getting talked about as much, but I thought that was a really good move by the Giants to go get Malik Neighbors in that spot.
Well, and they haven't had somebody like him in a long time as far as like being a dynamic weapon at receiver. I mean, they had Odell obviously for a couple years, who was dynamic before he started getting banged up a little bit, and then he eventually obviously moved on there. But they really haven't had a ton of those guys in my lifetime, really. I mean, they've had some good players, like Amani Toomer was a good player. Plexico was a good player for a couple years. But when they're talking about dynamic ability, the ability to just change a game on one play, that's what Malik Neighbors brings to the table. And honestly, you're going to have to figure out if Daniel Jones is good or not. And I think he's bad. I do not have much hope for Daniel Jones.
I don't disagree. Disagree. But you spent the money on him. Let's go find out. Because here's the deal, Ryan.
Yeah.
You're now going to have Malik Neighbors, Darren Waller. I think this move makes Darius Slayton better, because I think Darius Slayton had to be their number one last year. Now he can kind of be a number two.
Wan'Dale Robinson, if he's healthy.
And you got him in the slot. And now Jalen Hyatt goes into year 2.
Sure.
So he's now got weapons. Mm-hmm. So there's no excuses now. And if he doesn't pan out, because here's the danger you can run into. Guy doesn't pan out and you're like, did we really do the best we could to put the pieces around him to be successful?
Right.
Well, that was somewhat debatable with the Giants. I don't think that it is anymore with this pick, because now with getting Hyatt last year, getting Wan'Dale, did they get Wan'Dale last year or the year before?
I think it was 2 years ago now. I think it was 2 years ago.
You got Slayton 3 or 4 years ago. You got him in, I think, the 3rd or 4th round. Did they trade or sign Waller last offseason? I forget. They traded for him, right?
I think they traded for him, And I think their Slayton was like a 6th round pick, if I remember correctly.
Out of Auburn. But the point is, Ryan, they've gone out and they've said, okay, they're doing what good franchises are supposed to do. If you draft a quarterback high, whether you think he should have been picked 6th or not, are you building around him?
Right.
And with what the Giants have done, now there's still maybe some upgrades they could make on the offensive line, but you went out and got a franchise wide receiver. The other receivers are good players. I never felt Jalen Hyatt was a franchise receiver. He was a speed guy that's a great complementary weapon if you have others around him. Mm-hmm. Darren Waller's a good receiver. He's not a Travis Kelce, George Kittle, top guy on your team dude. Right. Now you have that dude. And so to me, Malik Neighbors in this case is an elevator, because having him now, if he's legit, now makes everyone else better, because now they all get to slide into roles that better fit what they do. And that's a reason I really think that pick made a lot of sense for the Giants and could be impactful. And if Daniel Jones isn't the guy, then next offseason, you go out and get yourselves a veteran quarterback, and he's walking into a pretty good situation from a talent around him standpoint.
Agreed. I think it's always about maximizing the roster. If you have quarterback concerns, the best case you can do is to maximize for them, because the long-term could also be the next quarterback that walks in has a pretty decent situation to be in. You don't want it to be a barren wasteland.
Right. And let's not forget the Giants were in the playoffs 2 years ago. This isn't like a team that just has a crap roster. They had a bad year, a lot of injuries, a lot of things didn't go their way. I'm very curious to see what they're going to do. What was some others, Ryan, that you just kind of go back and forth? What were a couple other the picks in this few of the others that you really liked in this draft?
Yeah. Pittsburgh Steelers taking Troy Fautanu at 20, I thought was an excellent pick, man. They need upgrades at offensive tackle potentially. They can upgrade center and a guard spot as well.
Where do
Like
you,
they
do you
need
think he
stuff.
ends up inside, Ryan, or do you think they'll try him outside?
I think they'll try him at tackle first, and then if not, I think he could be the long-term center, which is wild to say. That's usually not a transition that happens, but this kid is a very unique player. He's sub 6'4", so he's shorter, but he has 34 plus inch arms, so he has NFL length to last at offensive tackle. I personally believe that he's more Zach Martin than he is, a true offensive tackle at the next level. Like I think he could be a good tackle. But I think he'd be an excellent interior player, like a Pro Bowl level interior player. And I think that it's a great idea for the Steelers, who have multiple needs on the offensive line, to take a player that we always hear the cliche, play your best five. Well, Troy Fautanu literally can let you play your best five, literally, because he can fit into a couple different spots. So that was one that I think maximized them a ton. And then I hate talking good about the Philadelphia Eagles because for people that don't know, I live outside of Philadelphia and I dislike the Philadelphia Eagles. I truly do. But I would say this. I think that people need to evolve as evaluators, as organizations, and as general managers. And I think that we're seeing an evolution for Howie Roseman this offseason because Howie's a good general manager, right? But he evolved before 2017 and had them get this great offseason that helped them because for people that don't know, Howie Roseman ran the Eagles earlier in the 2010s and he got relegated, Brian, to like another position. They're like, get out of here. You're sitting in this other office or whatever. So he got demoted basically. He got the reins back. And he was a big reason, obviously, with the wheeling and dealing to get them a Super Bowl in the 2017 to 2018 year. But then I think that he's going through a little bit more of a transitional period now where what he did now is starting to not work as much. And he's done a couple things this offseason that are a very rare thing. One, he broke the bank for a running back in Saquon Barkley. That is not a Howie Roseman move. Like that is not a position they have ever valued. They've always been cheapskates at running back. Broke the bank there. They also gave, although a one-year deal, they paid Devin White, who got released by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to come play linebacker. Another position, Eagles never prioritize linebackers ever. They never do that. And then what did he do here, Brian? They drafted Quinyon Mitchell with the 22nd overall pick, first corner off the board out of Toledo. That is the first cornerback that has been drafted in the first round by the Philadelphia Eagles since 2002, was Lito Shepherd out of South Carolina that year. They do not take first-round corners. They do not, historically.
Brian, we talked about them taking Quinyon Mitchell yesterday.
Yeah.
But the discussion was them moving up into the draft to get him. So to get a guy that most people had going from 10 to 15 at 22 without having to give everything up, I think the draft fell perfectly for the Eagles. And I'll be honest, I think when I look at cornerbacks, I think the draft worked out really well for all. There was 3 taken yesterday, correct?
Yep.
Mitchell, Arnold, and Wiggins.
Yes.
I think all 3 of those teams, like it worked out. Like the Lions had to move up to 24. But again, to take a guy that some people had predicted to go to the Broncos at 12 or the Colts at 15 if Mitchell went earlier. So you trade up to number 24 to move up from 29 to 24. They had to give up a pick in the 70s. That's a valuable pick. But they got a guy that they very much value and a guy that I think fits their defensive system really well in Terrion Arnold.
Yeah.
That was and then Baltimore getting Nate Wiggins. They needed a pure speed cover guy. I think all 3 teams that took corners in the first round, because it was a need, I thought they all hit home runs. The only one that I'd somewhat, I always get queasy giving up picks, Ryan. That's just kind of how I am. But you know what? The Lions don't have a lot of needs.
Right.
And they needed to hit home runs in the needs they had, and they definitely needed a corner. And so I thought all 3 of the teams that took cornerbacks in the first round big time hits.
If I was a betting man before the draft, I would have said Terrion Arnold was a no doubt top 20 player in this class as far as getting drafted. But I would also say this. Why are the Baltimore Ravens always picking like 30 and stuff, right? Or contending for Super Bowls every single year? It's because they just let good players fall to them every single year. Brian, I was talking about this with Joe, and like when they had Ozzie Newsome as their general manager, like, okay, Ray Lewis, you're in the 20s. Come over, bro. Like, you can come play, right? Like, they do that stuff all the time. Lamar Jackson, number 32. And then Eric DeCosta takes over. Oh, Kyle Hamilton, people are overthinking you. Come on, man. Number 14 overall. Why not? And this is the same thing over and over again. They took Nate Wiggins at 30. And in my opinion, he was the best player on the board of a position of need. And they got Nate Wiggins, who I value as a top 10 player in this class. I know that there's some concern over just the play strength and those types of things, right? And it is fair. It's absolutely fair. But if I'm talking about just pure cover skills, the ability to flip your hips, change direction, run with anyone, that kid has as much coverage upside as anyone in this class, in my opinion. You got him at 30.
Here's my thing about Nate Wiggins, Ryan. 10 to 15 years ago, I'd have been a lot more worried about that than I am now. We're in this era of smaller, faster receivers. There's not as many, back in the day, there was a lot more of the, everybody was looking for that 6'4" guy that could run, right? Like that's what everybody was looking for. Mm-hmm. That's not the case as much anymore. You're seeing a shift back to the shiftier, faster guys and the route runners, and that's where Nate's really good. And to me, that's why I look at it and say this is a guy that was a good pick. And to your point, they just sat back and let the draft come to them. That's what the best teams do. And then if you do make a move, you jump up, 4 or 5 spots where you don't have to give up as much. Because for example, if the Eagles are going to go from 22 to 12 to get Mitchell, they were going to have to give up a lot. That 10 spots is a lot. You're going to have to give up multiple valuable picks. And they just let the draft come to them. And this is also the benefit of your needs being in a year where it is a good class. It is a good corner class. So they could afford to, hey, if we don't get Mitchell, we still like Arnold. We still like Wiggins, or we still like Kool-Aid or Cooper DeJean or whoever, and so those things made a lot of sense. So I thought the cornerback selections in this draft were really, really good.
And I would say this too is I keep thinking of examples because Eric DeCosta worked with Ozzie Newsome, and I think that they have always been a very best player available, trade back more than we trade up type of team. Like that's always been their mantra, and it's worked for them. Tyler Linderbaum was another guy a couple years ago where it's just like, just let good players fall to you, man. Just let them fall to you. And I think this was another example of let's not overthink it. Nate Wiggins is good. We have a first-round grade on him. He's here at 30. We're going to take him because we need that position. So I think it's a tremendous pick.
Some other picks, Ryan. Here's one that's going to end up being a great pick or a very shaky pick. And I know you love the pick, and if it works out, it's great. But the Bengals taking Amarius Mims at 18 is going to be one of those ones that it ends up being a huge pickup because you got a top 10 talent at 18. But I get a little bit nervous because Joe Burrow needs help now.
Sure.
And now they did make some moves this offseason to try to shore it up with some veterans. So maybe there's that growth period. But if he ends up being as good as some people think he is, you being one of those, then this is going to end up being a great pick. And you got him at 18 as opposed to, 8, 5 if you're the Chargers, 7 for the Titans, that type of thing. That's going to be one of those ones. I don't know if I like it. I don't hate it. I have a lot of questions about Mims. Not so much about his ability. It's the guy played 8 games this year. He's got some injury questions. He hasn't played a lot of football. When he's played, it's been pretty good. But I need the guy to be out there. And so that's an interesting one that could end up being a steal or one where you look back and say, man, I wish they maybe would have taken a more of a sure thing at that spot if they needed a tackle.
Well, I think the good thing is that they have gotten veterans, to your point, right? You have Orlando Brown Jr. still. You have Trent Brown now. So you can figure it out next year at offensive tackle. But I do think that at 18, I think the risk is appropriate there. It is risk. There's no doubt about it because I'm not worried as much about, and I think that people misunderstand this, is that Amarius Mims on the field is really good film, right? But the lack of experience thing or lack of availability thing, that's the major question mark. Can I get 17 games out of him? Can I get 15 plus games out of him? That's the question mark. It is. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about medicals other than what people tell me is what it is. But I do think that he has as much upside as any tackle in this class, if not more, if not the most in this class. So take a swing at 18. Yep. I'm totally fine with it. I mean, if they would have went Troy Fautanu instead, I would have been good with that route as well. But I think taking a swing at Mims at 18, I can definitely stomach that risk.
I would not have done it for the reasons I mentioned. But again, I also am not going to say, nope, Ryan, nope, you're wrong. Because again, when you're going to bet on a guy, bet on elite talent. And I haven't heard anything about Mims as far as like character. Like a buddy of mine was like,
Yeah,
oh,
he's
he's
fine.
like Isaiah Wilson. I was like, he's nothing like Isaiah Wilson. Number
Oh, no,
one, he's
Isaiah
way more
Wilson is
talented than Isaiah Wilson. Number
Right.
one,
Yeah.
Isaiah Wilson was way overrated coming out. And then, number two, Isaiah Wilson had issues that went far beyond whatever he could or couldn't do on the football field.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard anything like that about him.
Me neither.
Another pick that I like, Ryan, in this, or the couple things I liked. I thought Jacksonville had a masterful first round.
Yes.
They're sitting there at 17, and both positions that they want still have really good players available. There's a lot of rumblings that they loved Brian Thomas coming out of it. They also needed another corner. They had gotten rid of some of their corners, and they needed another corner. So they're sitting there at 17, and not a single corner has been taken.
Yep.
And instead of taking the guy they wanted, they took a bit of a gamble, but I think it's a smart, calculated gamble to trade down to 23. They got a fifth or a sixth this year, and then a third and a fourth next year, moved down to 6. And Ryan, they got the guy they wanted anyway.
Yeah.
In Brian Thomas. So now you get your franchise quarterback, a big time, I would argue, top 3 upside receiver in this draft class. And you picked up extra capital in the draft this year and next to do it. Because it's not just about, well, maybe who they're going to get in the third round next year, but now they got those extra day 2 picks that if they need to move up next year, they now have capital to move around next year if there's a guy there that they think can turn it, because they're getting really, really close to saying they don't have as many needs as they used to where if Brian Thomas hits, now you're in a situation next year where you can use some of that extra capital to move around and get guys that you want to fill those final needs. And then now the Jaguars can go make a run but I love that. So you not only to get Brian Thomas, guy you wanted, guy whose upside I love, but you also picked up extra draft picks for it. I thought the Jaguars hit a home run on day one.
I think it's really smart that they read the board as well as they did too, because I think that you moved back to 23 because there was 2 players that had been most associated with Jacksonville. One was Quinyon Mitchell, who went 1 pick before them at 22 in the end. The other player was Brian Thomas Jr. First and foremost, there was some conversation over a medical recheck for Brian Thomas Jr. that made him push back maybe like 5 to 10 picks, whatever. But also, they saw what the board had coming next, right? 18, Cincinnati was probably going offensive line. 19, Los Angeles Rams were probably going defensive line. Maybe a corner, but more than likely defensive line. 20, Pittsburgh desperately needed offensive line. You knew that's where they were going to go. 21, Dolphins, Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips both coming off of injuries this past season. You needed an edge presence. They kind of knew that. 22, that's where the Philadelphia Eagles maybe ruined things slightly because they probably would have loved to have the option to take Quinyon or Brian Thomas, whoever the heck they wanted at 23. But regardless, I think they took a calculated risk because they knew at least one of their guys was probably going to be there at 23. And Brian Thomas Jr. was a guy that I was mocking to them at 17 a whole lot because I think he's exactly what they need. Again, he needs some maturation. He needs to play more. He needs to expand his route tree, all those types of things. But you know what I can ask Brian Thomas to do in year 1? Exactly what I don't have on this roster. I have Christian Kirk, who's an intermediate separator, a guy that's going to run deep overs, do some screen stuff, like that type of guy, right? You also have Zay Jones, who's a really good possession receiver, not incredibly dynamic. You don't have a guy because they went and got Gabe Davis this past offseason, who's more of the vertical separator, but he's been super inconsistent for Buffalo the last couple of years. They needed a guy who is long and can run and can help outside the numbers and can help vertically. That's what Brian Thomas brings. So even if Brian Thomas is only a 40-something catch guy in 2024, but hey, you know what he did with those 40-something catches? He went for 700 yards and a few big plays next year. That's huge for Trevor Lawrence because that opens up the field, and I think they need to open up the field, and he brings that.
Did you mention Gabe Davis as well, who they got this offseason? I mean,
they got him this offseason to hopefully fill a little bit of that role, but again, he's been so inconsistent at that role.
But the thing is, Ryan, again, you don't have any number ones. They don't have a number one.
No.
But if you're not going to have a number one, you better have a lot of different types of guys who can fill different roles, and I think that's what the Jaguars have done. Yep. And also, if you're going to have a franchise quarterback like him, you have to build around him.
Yes.
And like you said, they just didn't have that guy. Gabe Davis maybe can be that. He did that at times with Josh Allen, But this is, like you said, this may not be a guy that maybe he eventually grows into an 80 catch guy. But right now, you know what he can do. He can stretch the field. He showed me last year too, Ryan. He's pretty good winning even when covered last year. And so I really like the pickup. And looking at this from a Notre Dame standpoint, it does not hurt Notre Dame that their offensive coordinator can say, not only did we produce the number 5 pick, but our offensive coordinator produced the number 2, 6, and 23 picks on offense. So that's not going to hurt either when Notre Dame hits the recruiting trail. Like, look what this offense can produce. This is why, hey, Deuce, you don't want to go anywhere else because look what this offense can produce. Hey, Taylon Taylor, Derek Meadows, Tanook Hines, Javon Boggs, 2026 receivers. This is what this offense can do. It's going to help them, in my opinion, in a big way on offense.
We've heard them sell that too. Tanook Hines literally said that they had told him that he can affect the game the way Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas and those types of guys. So they're using it. Somehow LSU and Joe Sloan are going to try to take credit for it, but we know the truth.
Well, and we know the truth, and we can also look back and say, well, Mike Denbrock has a much longer history of doing that than Joe Sloan does because he did it at Cincinnati with Alec Pierce and Tyler Scott, Trey Thomas, and he did it in Notre Dame with Will Fuller. He wasn't here to coach those guys, but he was the driving force recruiting-wise behind Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin and Javon McKinley, a lot of those guys. So certainly has a track record of that, and last night certainly does not hurt at all to be doing that. I want to make sure that I'm not being my anti-Brian Kelly self last night.
Okay.
Did you see the way that those 3 kids all walked right by him?
I didn't.
Did you
actually
see that?
I didn't.
Go
see
back
that,
and watch that. I'm curious.
Okay.
It was it was weird, and the look on his face, like when they walked by him, was like, it was very interesting. I talked to Sean. Go back and watch it. It was very because I missed Jaden Daniels. I saw it with Malik Neighbors, and I saw Brian Thomas. And I was like, And I went back and watched with Jaden Daniels. Like, oh my goodness, like they all just literally. I don't want to soil your mind too much. Just go back and watch it and give me a call later and tell me what you thought about it. I thought it was very interesting. Very interesting. Just a couple more, Ryan, that I liked. I thought Arizona had a really good draft. Get Marvin Harrison Jr. And Darius Robinson, because you get Robinson this year. You got Will Anderson, or not Will Anderson. Who's the other edge they got recently? But anyway, you get a big power guy that could maybe grow into an interior guy. I like that. I think there's a need for that. A couple others that I liked. End it this way. Watch some film of Xavier Legette last night after you and I talked because I didn't watch a ton of him. And I wanted them to go get a bigger outside guy, personally, like taller. But when I watch his film, I think that's kind of something Bryce Young needs. He needs that guy that can take a 5-yard play and has the strength and speed to do something with it.
Get out of jail free card.
Because I wanted the bigger guy because I just didn't know a lot about Legette. But when I watched the film, I liked it. And I'm going to tell you a pick. You mentioned Ricky Pearsall. I actually really like that one. If you take out the context of what else was on the board, I think that's where the debate is. I actually like that fit. I think having a guy like him, because he's a route runner, he can win contested catches. He brings some athleticism to the table, but he's more of a natural receiver than Debo and Brandon Ayuk. And I think now you've got that guy that can bring a little something different where, if you keep those 2 receivers, now you've given your quarterback a lot of weapons. Or if those receivers aren't happy, then you can move them, and you now have a guy that I think fits that Mike Shanahan or Kyle Shanahan version of the West Coast very well, which is route runners with speed. I think it's a great fit in that. So I actually like that. I really like that pick. We just take the context out of it of who else was there. I really like that pick. And now if they can't convince those other 2 receivers to stay, at least one of them is dead set on leaving. There's a lot of rumblings that Ayuk wants to get traded and Debo wants to get traded and all that kind of stuff. If you can convince them to stay, now your young quarterback has tons of weapons, and now your stud running back has a lot of protection outside with Kittle, Ayuk, Debo, and now Ricky Pearsall, who I think is a guy that it doesn't have the ceiling of an A.D. Mitchell, a Keon Coleman, but as far as a guy that's ready to play right now, this is a guy who's a good football player that had crap at quarterback his career. I really like Ricky Pearsall. I do. And his test, his testing numbers were exceptional.
They're great.
I mean, they were exceptional, but the film is what I like. He's a really good route runner that can win contested catches. And I don't know if I'll put it to you like this, Ryan. I don't know that he makes it to 31 if he'd have spent his career playing in a real offense.
Yeah.
I think his production would have been such that you might have seen him go a lot earlier.
He reminds me of Adam Thielen with a little more juice, right? Like he definitely can run faster than Thielen, but he kind of has that silky smooth feel, he can play outside with the speed that he has, but I really do like him as kind of a slot a lot as well with his route running and ability to work against zone coverage. I just think also that Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, they just want an all-white support cast, man. That's what they want. They want Christian McCaffrey and Ricky Pearsall and George Kittle. And
you always got to go there. You always got to go there.
They're alienating Debo and Ayuk. They want him out of here. They just want the all-white team.
Not even going there. Not even going to take the bait on that. I like the pick. I like the pick a lot. Dallas getting Tyler Guyton, I don't hate. I'm not taking Tyler Guyton in the first round, Ryan, but they traded down, got a third-round pick, and they filled a need. I don't hate it.
Experience playing right tackle as well. They need to upgrade Terrence Steele, and because I think that their idea is that they're going to move Tyler Smith out to left tackle. Who I really like Tyler Smith. He's actually been dynamite at guard too.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love Tyler Smith coming out of Tulsa, and he has been playing really well at guard, but he's the heir apparent at left tackle now that Tyron Smith's out of there, and I think that they still have the need at right tackle though. Yeah. So he is a developmental guy.
He's going to have a veteran, all-pro Hall of Famer next to him, teaching him the rope, showing him the ropes as well, which can't be discounted either in Zach Martin.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
A little higher than I would have liked to see him go. Yeah, but it makes sense.
I'm always for betting on traits at offensive tackle, and he certainly has a lot of traits to bet on. So I'm okay. I'm okay with it.
Let's talk about some things we didn't like, Ryan, before we wrap it up by previewing day 2. We'll preview today 2 from a Notre Dame standpoint a little bit, but more so from just big picture. What are some ones you didn't like? I think we spent enough time on the Penix one. I think we can. We said that one. What are some others, Ryan? And I'll share some of mine as well. But I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, one that I really disliked was, and I'm just looking down the list, Chop Robinson at 21 to Miami was one of my most hated picks. Actually, that one may have annoyed me more than the Penix one, just because my dad's a Dolphins fan, and I would like them to not do bad or poorly in the draft.
So I was with the Redskins as a kid. I wasn't a Redskins fan, but I always wanted the Redskins to do well because then my parents were happy. You know what I mean? So
I think that we talked about panic. I think that this was a panic move. The top 3 edges were off the board. You took a gamble on a kid that's a really good athlete and is a historical tester in Chop Robinson. But man, I'm just not there with Chop in the first round. I'm just not there. Historically short arms and wingspan, does not play the run well, and wasn't overly productive in college.
Thank you.
All of those things together. Could he be a designated pass rusher that gives you some juice on third downs? Yeah, probably. But I just don't see him as a 21 overall pick. I think that you could have found someone, a Jalix Hunt in the 3rd or 4th round, someone that could be a designated pass rusher early on that also has more upside, in my opinion, to be an every down football player. Adisa Isaac out of Penn State, the other edge that's probably not going to go into the 2nd or 3rd round.
It wasn't the athlete that Chop was, but was a better football player. This is the whole point. He was a better football player.
I'm missing it with Chop. I understand the athleticism, but I think the length concerns show up a lot. I think he's well below average against the run, and I don't think he finishes plays, probably partly because he doesn't have any length or wingspan to be able to finish plays. So I think 21 was just way too early. That was one of my biggest, not head scratchers, because I knew that it was probably going to happen for someone in this first round, but I just did not like that one. And the other one that I was talking about on Twitter a little bit earlier, I hated the Green Bay Packers taking Jordan Morgan 25. I hate it because they're going to play him at left tackle because they have Rasheed Walker as their starting left tackle right now. It sounds like they're going to play him at left tackle, and he's just not a tackle in the NFL level. His foot speed is average on the NFL level, but you can pass with average if you have overcompensating factors. He has historically short arms and wingspan. Historically short. Here, Brian, ready? Here's the list of, because he has 32.
Real quick, Ryan, everyone that I've read, I actually like Jordan Morgan's film.
Okay.
I do. But everyone I agreed with the assessments I've read, which is, but his body type, you have to move him inside.
Yes.
Like that's like, you know what I mean? So like, I like the film, and you're not even talking about the film, which is because you're making a different point.
projection.
You needed a tackle.
Yeah.
He's not a tackle.
Right. He had sub 33-inch arms. It was like 32 3/4, I think, somewhere in that ballpark. Here is the list for everyone out there. Here is the list of offensive tackles since the year 1999 with sub 33-inch arms that were good. That's it. That's the list. That's the list. That is the list.
I thought you were going to at least give me one.
No, there's none. You can't find one. You can't find one. There is not. There's just, if he is a good tackle in the NFL level, he is a historical outlier, an absolute of all outliers. For one, I don't think he's a tackle. Two, I don't dislike him at guard, but I also think if you're drafting him to play an interior potentially long term, I think there were better interior offensive linemen that were on the board still. Yeah. I just think there were. Graham Barton from Duke would have been a better pick, in my opinion, if that was the vantage point that you're going for. So I just don't like the pick. But I will say this: Green Bay has gotten a lot out of offensive linemen historically. So I'm sure he'll end up being solid. Yeah. But if he is solid, though, I don't think it's a tackle, man. Yeah. I just don't think it's going to be at left tackle. I don't think that you filled the hole that you thought you were filling at 25. And I think that was a reach.
Ryan, I like the player. I don't like the need that they're going to ask that player to fill. I want to go back to Chop for a second, because Micah Simmons is the exception to the Penn State rule for me.
Micah Parsons.
What did I say?
Micah Simmons. I don't know. Micah Simmons.
Micah Simmons.
I have no idea.
Micah Parsons is like, I don't even know who Simmons would be. Micah Parsons, to me, is a different player than what we normally see it come out of Penn State, which is Penn State produces these combine freaks that get picked higher than they should, that end up not being what people thought they're going to be.
Yeah.
But it's so obvious because they don't produce in college. And when I look at Chop Robinson, and everybody talks about like, oh, he was like 48 pressures in 2022, according to Pro Football Focus. 40, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
He only had 14 hits on the quarterback, Ryan. That's sacks plus hits. He had 5 sacks and 9 hits. And I'm like, when you are pass rushing that much and you're having that many hurries, don't you think you should like be a lot more productive than that? I mean,
man.
I look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste. He had 38 pressures this year, 16 hits on the quarterback.
Right. And
that's the whole point. His speed lets him win around the edge, and he gets a hurry. Like there were games and I remember watching him on film. I'm thinking, this guy's pretty explosive, but he has like one move. He had 9 pressures against Michigan State last year. Did you watch the film in 22 against Michigan State? It's actually fascinating.
I believe
so. He had 9 pressures on the quarterback. Not one time did he actually make contact with the quarterback in that game.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. People are going to point to other outliers like Daniil Hunter, for instance, right? Who had a lot of pressures but didn't have a lot of sacks at LSU. But the difference is Daniil Hunter is 6'5" with long arms and explosiveness as well. Right. Like that translates to finishing better. It was a technical thing. It was a maturing thing. I don't know if –
and he was light. He was light, so you could knock him off course when he was young at LSU. You know what I mean?
What about Chop Robinson's profile tells me that he's going to finish better on the NFL level than he did in college?
Against longer and longer and longer players.
Right. Like, how is he going to get off blocks? How is he going to get off blocks? I don't know if he's going to be able to get off blocks. Again, maybe he ends up being a good designated pass rusher because that speed wins and he makes plays that way. But I think it's more than likely that he struggles to finish plays like he struggled to finish plays at Penn State. Yeah. I just think that's where we are.
Here's the last one we'll talk about, Ryan, before we move on to and we wrap this up with kind of a preview of tonight. I know everybody's excited about the Xavier Worthy pick, and they look at Pat Mahomes and those kind of things. And this could end up being a great pick, because everybody's going to think Tyreek Hill. But can we stop with the Tyreek Hill comparisons? Because the only thing they have in common is speed. Tyreek Hill is strong, strong for his size. The problem with Xavier Worthy is this: he's incredibly fast.
Yes,
and that allowed him to produce in college, much like John Ross produced in college. The problem is he's not a very good wide receiver. He doesn't have much of a route profile to me. He is 160 pounds and not strong. Like Jahan Dotson was undersized, but he was strong for his size. And he doesn't catch the ball very well. I mean, Texas might have beat Washington in the Alamo Bowl 2 years ago if he could catch. I mean, it could end up working out because you have Pat Mahomes and it's the Chiefs, and it's just one of those things like, okay, I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt because they're the Chiefs and they're just masters at this. But
Right.
every team, even the Chiefs, get picks wrong, just like taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire a couple years ago in the first round. It was a bad pick.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like with other if they'd have taken Ricky Pearsall there, I'd have loved it. If they'd have taken A.D. Mitchell there, who's also got some flaws to his game, but is 6'3", if they'd have taken a Keon, there's a lot of receivers that I'd have said, you know what, maybe it's a little too high, but I love that pick because you have Pat Mahomes.
Right.
This one is like people are going to fall. Oh, he's 4.21, and I get all that, but it's like, remember the guy from Necessary Roughness, Stonehands? Like he could get open because he was fast, but couldn't catch the dang ball. And you're going to have receivers in the NFL, corners in the NFL are going to eat this kid up.
Yep.
Because his functional play strength is one of the worst I've seen in a long time, and and he can't catch.
Yeah,
like
Another kid. Look, like this is scouting 101 for people out there, right? Typically, betting on historical outliers is not a good idea, right? Because the data tells you that that's probably not a player that's going to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about body types, Xavier Worthy has some very, very easy comparison to Devonta Smith when he came out of Alabama. Similar body types, really sleek, right? But Devonta Smith is an outlier. I mean, he's one of one. You have not seen 160-something pound guys develop into really good NFL wide receivers like him, just historically. It just hasn't happened much. Xavier Worthy, and what was the difference though between Xavier Worthy and Devonta Smith? Devonta Smith had vice grips for hands,
and he was strong for his size.
Yeah.
But yes, his hands are as good as you'll ever see. Mm-hmm. His ability to catch the contested balls at that size is rare.
Yes,
I mean it's just like you said, he's the outlier. He's the exception to the rule, but his game is different. He knew Devonta Smith is essentially you may disagree with this, but to me, Devonta Smith is a skinny Torrey Holt. Or not Torrey Holt. Torrey Holt, right? Like just exceptional route runner, exceptional hands, exceptional, I'm sorry. No. Isaac Bruce. I'm thinking of the other Isaac Bruce.
I love Isaac
just exceptional receiver.
Yep.
He knows how to play. Yes, he's not the biggest guy because Torrey Holt was actually built well. Isaac Bruce is the one I'm thinking of. Great route runner, knew how to play, could catch, could do all those type of things. And he wasn't the biggest guy. He's bigger than Devonta Smith.
Sure.
But Devonta Smith is one of the most nuanced and advanced wide receivers I've seen in a long time. So you're going to take a chance on that. Again, Xavier Worthy has shaky hands, is not a very good route runner, and gets bullied. And I
guess this is one thing I will say for the Chiefs, and I think you mentioned it already, but the Chiefs are a team that can afford luxury, right? They just won a Super Bowl with the same wide receivers that they basically have on this roster, minus Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So
we'll see if Rashee Rice is on their team, but yes, as of right now, he is. Yes.
So if at worst Xavier Worthy is just a situational player that can create a couple big plays occasionally, is that enough for them? It might be. I don't know.
Probably. I mean, if he goes out there and catches 30 passes and averages 20 yards a catch, I think they'll be okay with that. But here's my fear is your number one is getting old and was not really a number one for much of the regular season. He turned it on in the postseason. How many more years are you going to be able to do that?
Right.
That's kind of my thing. And I just feel like there was a couple other guys that I think would have made more sense there at receiver. But again, they're betting on 4-2-1. That's what they're betting on. That's what it comes down to.
The fun rumor I heard yesterday early in the morning was that the Chiefs wanted to take a plunge and go up and draft Brock Bowers, and that would have been something.
Yeah. Ryan, we actually did have a couple super chats about the draft that I want to get to before we get to the previews for tonight. Number one, we had a super chat from Beefeater ND08. Appreciate you. Hi, IB fam. Shout out and prayers for my nephews who are heading to Coronado, California to start buds. That's SEAL training. Goodness. Great kid who we are incredibly proud of. Yeah, you should be, man. And just tell him we're praying for him and we thank him for his service because that is that is a decision that very few make, and even those few who make it survive it. So we'll definitely be praying for him. Also, for all of you out there, my buddy, I told you the other day, my friend Jason had surgery. They ended up moving him back. He had it yesterday. So definitely keep Jason in his prayers. I asked him how he was feeling. He said he felt like he just did I want to read what he said. He says, I feel like I did a whole body workout 3 times, so, and then my mom's surgery went well. She's on the road to recovery, but they got in there and they said it was a lot worse than they thought it was. So keep her in your prayers as well. We greatly appreciate that. But we'll definitely, Beefeater also, man, we'll definitely keep your nephew in our prayers and tell him the IB Nation thanks him for his commitment to serving our country. Gregory Perez with a super chat. Thoughts on the Niners drafting Ricky Pearsall? Ryan, we addressed that earlier.
Yep.
I think you like I want to wrap it up because you like the player. Is your thing more of you just felt maybe there were some other guys on the board that would have made more sense at that position? Is that where you're coming from?
Yeah, I would have preferred a couple different players there potentially. And I mean, just number 20, what was it? 31 overall.
Yeah.
Like it's a little rich, right? But like, I don't dislike the player. I think he could be productive in that offense. But if that was the type of player you were looking for, like I would have rather than personally going after like Lad McConkey if that was the type that they were looking for. But so it's just a preference thing.
I like the pick. We'll see how it's going to be interesting how it plays out. Iden Benami with a super chat. Thank you, Iden. Would you guys draft a player who was told to retire? Why Colts? Why? LOL. I know many have Latu as the top edge. Too risky for me. Turner is better. Let me just say this real quick, Ryan.
Yep.
The medicals have all come back and cleared him. Correct? I mean,
I mean, so I had heard that it was a little bit back and forth with some teams. Like I think that some teams were a little bit more obviously okay with it compared to some others. And obviously the Colts are comfortable with where he was, or they wouldn't have drafted number 15 overall. So I think it was a little bit back and forth as far as some teams had their precautions with it. But I mean, again, a team drafted him 15 overall. So clearly the Colts are okay with what they saw and what the feedback they got was.
As far as the player, number one, I think he is more like, we have to be careful comparing edge players because not all edge players are built the same, right?
Yep.
Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor are the 2 best edge rushers I've ever seen. They're different positions, completely different players, right? Dallas Turner is a different type of edge rusher than Latu.
Oh, wait.
And the Colts, from what I can see, were looking for more of a pure down edge to rush the quarterback.
4-man front guy. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that the fit with Turner, I don't necessarily disagree that Turner has the higher ceiling and might not have been the better player without any context, but I just feel that the fit is like if you're the Denver Broncos running a 3-4, you're going to be looking for a different type of edge rusher than if you're a team that's a 4 down in certain instances. You know what I mean? So that would be my comeback to that is Turner may be the better player. I think it's at least debatable. I know there's some people that think he was, some people that don't, but they're different. It's like, are you looking for a 3-4 outside linebacker or a 4-3 end? The Colts are looking for a 4-3 end. Dallas Turner's a 3-4 outside linebacker. Basically, to use a very generic football term to make that point.
Sure, yeah. No, I think positionally it makes sense as far as it fit into the scheme. I think that makes total sense, and it probably went into the big part of the evaluation. I would also say this: I didn't like one. Again, the Colts clearly are okay with the medicals, and we'll see if they're right or wrong about that one long term. I don't know, but I would also say, I actually think that just my analysis, I think Latu is a much more technically sound player with a much better rush plan than what Dallas Turner has. Now, Dallas's tools are stupid, right? Like he's an incredible athlete. And I am usually in favor of betting on traits on the edge, like all the time. I am a big advocate of that. But if the Colts wanted the guy that, to Brian's point, is more of a 4-down guy, but also the more technically refined player that is more, maybe brings a higher floor to the table, I do actually think that's Latu. I would say that Turner is the higher ceiling guy, but his floor is lower as well. Like there's a little bit more boom or bust with him, but the boom could be very high boom. So we'll see.
Agree. I would love to see a Notre Dame defensive end have just a variety of you, just with the things he does with his hands. Would be so
Oh, for
nice
Latu?
to see that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Would
he's
be
got a
so
club
nice.
rip. He's got inside counters. He's
Oh
got
my
everything.
gosh,
He's got
he
a
really
ghost
does.
rush. He does
He
it all.
really does. He's got the whole thing. And then the last one, I've been saving this one. Aiden Benami, thank you for another super chat, my friend. Think the Raiders move Brock Bowers to wide receiver, LOL, Y2 tight end. So again, we have to be careful of football is far more nuanced now than it was when we were kids, where it was literally fullback, tailback, X, Z, Y. You know what I mean? Deep, strong side end, weak side end, football is much more nuanced now. And I think the Patriots actually showed that you can win with two top tight ends if you view them both as top tight ends, because they're very different players. And I think back to Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. Now, let's take away the fact that Aaron Hernandez was a psychopath. Just look at the football part of it, right? Yep. The fact is they were very different players.
Yes.
And the way that Brock Bowers plays the game, him and Michael Mayer are not going to be used at all the same way. Now, perhaps the Raiders don't think very highly of Michael Mayer. When I look at his usage, something leads me to believe that maybe the Raiders coaches don't think as highly of him as maybe the personnel people did. Perhaps. I don't know. But if they have utter faith in Michael Mayer, it still doesn't mean they shouldn't have considered taking Brock Bowers, because they're completely different players, in my opinion. Now, I don't love it. I'm just saying, if you're good, you have to look at it as it's not like they had George Kittle and then went out and drafted Travis Kelce or vice versa. Right. It's you had, I'm trying to think of like a historical example. You had Rob Gronkowski and you drafted Shannon Sharp, right? It's like two very different players that you can actually use together if you want. Right. I'm not saying that's what they should have done. I'm simply saying this isn't as easy as saying they drafted two running backs or two tight ends, because you can use them together in a lot of different ways and still have, some weapons with both. So again, I'm not speaking to, I actually didn't like the pick, to be completely honest with you. I don't know. I think there was bigger needs. But if the Raiders are like, this is the best player on the board, and he was the best football player probably on the board there, I would argue.
Yes.
They're saying, look, we can't pass up a top 5 to 8 talent at this spot, even though technically it's not a need. That I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that's why they made the pick. But I don't think making that pick means, well, we got to move on from Michael Mayer. They may, but it would be because you don't like Mayer. Not because, well, we have Bowers now, so I don't know what we're going to do with Mayer. There's a lot they could do with both of those guys.
I actually have heard that they really like Michael Mayer in Las Vegas. That's why I was kind of confused about the pick.
Yeah, I didn't. Just so you know, I wasn't saying that they don't. I don't know. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought they should have used him more. I don't know. What I'm saying is taking Bowers does not mean that they don't like Michael Mayer, because they're such different players. I just want to be clear.
I mean, because 12 personnel, you can use them a lot of different ways. But, I mean, you don't even have to call it 12 personnel. I mean, you could throw Brock Bowers in as a big slot or a boundary receiver, like anytime you want. And he could make a lot of plays, right? So they're very diverse. They're very different football players. I think they can work together very well. And I have heard that they do like Michael Mayer. So I think that Michael Mayer is very much in the plans here. But we don't have to classify Brock Bowers as a wide receiver or a tight end. We can just call him an offensive weapon. We could just leave it at that, right? Because he can do a lot. I mean, they were throwing bubble screens, giving him end arounds at Georgia. I mean, let's be serious.
He's an FBP, Ryan. Remember when UVA did that a couple years ago with
honestly.
FB? What was that?
Keontae Thompson.
Yes,
Thompson. Yeah.
His position on the depth chart was literally FBP, which stood for football player.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, Ryan, in this modern era, you can do more of that than when I was a kid and you were literally in 21 personnel with a fullback. I mean, everybody lined up in kind of the same personnel, and I remember when the teams would, the Bills started doing the run and shoot stuff, and you're just like, this is crazy. You don't have a tight end and a fullback on the field. What are you doing here? I mean, it's just a different era, and if you can have weapons on offense that allow you to attack the base defense and the sub packages in different ways, and you don't have to get off of it, there's value to that. So, I just, at some point in time, I think you have to look at it and say, I think they just took the best player available.
Yeah.
And because he complements the guy that they already have there, if they do like him, like you said, Ryan, and I don't know, these guys are not fighting. These guys aren't necessarily fighting for the same spot.
Right.
In my view, that's the difference.
And here's the point blank to it is I looked at the Raiders roster like 5 weeks ago. It sucks, man. Like, it's really, really bad. Taking best player available when it stinks that much, I don't think it's the worst idea in the
Yeah.
world. I really don't.
Yeah.
So I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie either, but you took the best player available. Your roster stinks. Let's start to rebuild it somehow.
Yeah.
So there we are.
Yep. So that's the last super chat, Ryan. So thank you all for those very, very much. We're going to head on to this last part, Ryan, and I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on. We're going to preview round 2. So just before we do that, real quick, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and if you've not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So Ryan, day 2 of the NFL draft starts tonight. Is it 7:00 Eastern start time? I know last night was
Eastern.
8.
7 Eastern, 12 on Saturday.
Round 2 and round 3 are tonight.
Mhm.
It's going to be interesting. The Bills, who we didn't talk about, kept trading. They did twice last night. They went from 28 to 32, and then from 32 to 33, picked up some extra capital, and now they're in position to either take the best corner available or the best receiver available, which most people are saying. There's a lot of, I just think there's going to be a lot of movement here after teams have kind of been able to reassess their board. So just big picture, Ryan, let's kind of get into day 2, just some overall thoughts, some preview, some teams that we could see moving around, some positions that we could see runs on, and then we'll wrap things up by I'll ask you about some of the Notre Dame guys that we could hear their names called tonight.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm very interested to see the positions that are going to be targeted most early on in this draft because we talked about it. Wide receiver, obviously, Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Malachi Corley. There's a lot, A.D. Mitchell. There's a lot of really talented receivers that are left. I'm interested to see that first and foremost. Cornerbacks, mentioned Kool-Aid McKinstry, mentioned Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. There is a lot of talented corners on the board as well. My one other big one that I'm interested in, because I actually just saw someone report it before we started, but there apparently might be some high demand for Spencer Rattler somewhere in the second round. So we'll see if that is a situation that happens. But regardless, I think it's the 2 prominent positions that we haven't seen major run on yet. We started to see wide receivers more down the stretch and cornerbacks more down the stretch. But I think we're going to get massive runs at corner and wide receiver early on in this second round.
Yeah, because like Ryan, if you look at the available draft class at quarterback,
yep,
and it's Spencer, and you know my stance on Spencer Rattler. If I was starting a 7-on-7 team, I would love to have Spencer Rattler. And I know he had a better year this year and all that other kind of stuff. I get it. I just still feel like that is just not a guy that handles high leverage situations very well. And when your team sucks, there's not as much pressure on you. It's just a reality of it. After that, it's Michael Pratt, who has a lot of ability, but still raw and injury prone. And then after that, you're talking about Keaton Slovis, Jordan Travis, Devin Leary, Joe Milton, Sam Hartman. So it is a huge drop off after the next 2 quarterbacks on the board. And so I very much see them both being picked a lot higher maybe than they should. Kind of like when Kellen Mond and Ian Book went way higher than they should when that run happened back in, 2021. Remember the Texans traded up, and I think they traded up and got Davis Mills. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, there's only 2 more quarterbacks left. So now teams had to make their move. So that'll be very interesting, Ryan, to see how that goes. Receiver, you talk about it, Ryan. You said A.D. Mitchell, you Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman. There's also Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Troy Franklin, Brendan Rice, Javon Baker, Devontae Walker, Malachi Corley, Malik Washington, Johnny Wilson. There's a lot of good receivers still on the board. A lot of good receivers on the board that teams will be able to get in round 2 and 3. Cornerback, you mentioned also. There's a lot of talented cornerbacks left on the board. Here's the question I want to ask you from a Notre Dame standpoint, Ryan. You've got Cooper DeJean, who a lot of people thought was a first-round pick. Same with Kool-Aid McKinstry. You got Enos Rakestraw, Kamari Lassiter, TJ Tampa, Max Melton, Mike Sainristil from Michigan, who's a slot, Cam Hart, Andrew Phillips, Kyrie Jackson. So what are you going to be looking for to maybe think that we could hear Cam Hart's name called tonight? Do you think a run has to start early, or do you think there might be some teams that actually value Cam over, some of those other cornerbacks? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's going to be teams that value Cam. They're going to put him in buckets, I think, right? Because a couple of the kids that you mentioned, like I would group like Max Melton and Kamari Lassiter in the same buckets because they're similar size. They're guys that can play a little bit in the slot, play outside. They're kind of a little bit of movement-based players. A guy like a Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon and Cam Hart would be grouped in a bucket because they're the longer,
And Kool-Aid,
more
yeah.
zone-based type of corners, probably on the next level. I think you could even throw TJ Tampa into that conversation as well out of Iowa State. So I think it really depends on the team that is drafting them. Like I think of the Washington Commanders now that Dan Quinn is the coach, right? The Kansas City Chiefs have been a team that has really valued size outside of Trent McDuffie at corner. I mean, they have like Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson. They're more of longer based corners. Dallas Cowboys are still a team that really likes those longer corners. Seattle's a team that likes the longer corners. So those teams that are more cover three heavy, press man heavy type of systems, I think that they're going to value the size length of Cam. So I don't think it necessarily comes down to a run on corners. Like if the first few picks is, let's say, Kamari Lassiter and Ennis Rankstraw come off in the next 7 picks, I don't know if that affects Cam as much other than just corner numbers, but I do think that it's more about what teams want a Cam Hart style corner on the next level.
Because a team looking at Mike Sanders still is not going to care about Cam Hart because they're two completely different players. One's a nickel, one's a right. I get you.
Yeah, no one's going to care about that.
I get you. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes, Ryan. Same with offensive line. I mean, there's some intriguing players left on the board. How will people value them? When you talk about a Blake Fisher, Roger Rosengarten, the kid from BYU, the kid from Yale, Christian Jones, Matt Goncalves, who ESPN lists as a tackle. I could see teams looking at him as a guy that's going to move inside. Patrick Paul from Houston. There's a lot of interesting players. Cooper Beebe, who is probably my favorite inside player left on the board right now. I like Cooper Beebe a lot. Yeah. But there's going to be a lot of teams that value these guys differently, which is going to obviously impact where Blake Fisher goes. But I mean, I looked at it was ESPN that has Blake Fisher's the number 1 tackle on the board.
It's wild.
So
there's some good tackles on the board, man. Yeah. Like I love Roger Rosengarten. I would not have been shocked if Roger Rosengarten would have been the last couple picks of the first round. Like I think that Roger Rosengarten could be a starting caliber right tackle pretty early on in his career. And then you mentioned like Kingsley Sumatea is a very talented player out of BYU, former Oregon kid. There's a ton of those guys. I really like kid from Yale, Karan Amagaji, is one of my favorite players in the class.
That's a 6'9" kid, right?
Isn't he? No, he's only 6'5", but he's got 36-inch arms. Kid? The Mendoza kid that transferred to Louisville, I think, this offseason.
That's the kid. So there was a kid from Yale that was 6'9",
yeah,
right?
He's like 6'8", 6'9", somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah, he transferred to Louisville, I think, this offseason. So he came back.
He didn't transfer out of Louisville like everyone else did.
Well, not yet.
Because you saw Tyler Barron also left, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the running back, Penny Boone left, I think, right? Yeah. So, yeah. The checks are bouncing in Louisville, man.
Yeah, I know,
right? That's the best places.
Sorry, I had to.
But, man, there's some good offensive tackles on the board. And the great thing is that several of those guys, I think, could project to playing inside as well. Like Karan Amagaji, I think, could definitely play tackle in the NFL level. But if the team wanted him inside a guard, could definitely do it. Blake, I think, is kind of the similar thing there, right? So, it's going to depend, I think, of what teams are looking for as far as left tackle versus right tackle with Blake, because Kingsley Sumatea has experience playing left tackle. Maybe you project him a little bit more there. Patrick Paul has experience playing left tackle. He's going to be more in the bucket of the true right tackles in this class. I think of Roger Rosengarten could play left tackle if you wanted him to, but he was a right tackle at Washington, so their team's just viewing him in that type of vein. So those types of players, that position, I think that's going to be dependent on where a guy like a Blake Fisher comes off the board.
Running back is a position that is yet to be picked.
Yes.
I did see that same draft board that has Blake Fisher as the number 1 left offensive tackle has Audric Estime as the 10th running back in this draft class. Which
that's Mel Kiper. Mel Kiper hates Audric Estime.
Yeah,
11th running back or something.
They have Isaac Garendo ahead of him, Ray Davis ahead of him, Marshawn Lloyd way ahead of him. So that's a very interesting one. But who do you think is the first running back to go? And when do you think we start? What's the range you're looking for to start to maybe see running back start coming off the board?
Yeah, I think that the running back class is a little bit lackluster, for the lack of a better word. The two guys that I would say is the most likely to come off the board first are Trey Benson from Florida State or Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. It really depends on what the medicals look like for Brooks. He tore his ACL, so it's not a major thing anymore as far as like where we are in the world, right? Like 2024 ACLs aren't a big thing if it's
right. And he
just
got
your
hurt
first
middle of the
one.
season, right? So I mean, he's
Right.
probably healthy for the start of the season in the
Right.
NFL season.
So,
Yeah.
so if his medicals check out, I wouldn't be shocked if Jonathan Brooks is the first one taken, but I think it's going to be between him and Trey Benson. I think second half of the second round. I don't think that we're going to see one early on in the second round.
I agree.
I don't think the NFL is very high on this running back class. I like Trey Benson. He's a good player out of
Right.
Florida State. I think he'll be a good back on the NFL level, but I think that we're getting to the point where I could find Trey Benson production in
Sure.
third to fourth round. I
Sure.
could find that guy now.
Yeah. Agree. Where do you see Audric Estime's name being called after how things does? So you had him late round 3 in your mock, correct?
Yeah.
Did anything happen last night, best available now, that has you kind of thinking because late 3 means you could see him maybe going a little bit sooner, a little bit later, which means, mid 3, early 4. It's always that range. What are your thoughts on do you still see that same range for Audric tonight?
Yeah, I earlier in the offseason, I thought maybe he could sneak into the second, but I still think it's third to fourth round. I think is kind of where we're looking at right now. Late 3, I'm trying to remember what the board looks like late 3, but I think there's a lot of running back needy teams in the late third round type of range. So I think we could get a big run. I think we're going to see a couple potentially late second, but then I think third round is really where the run starts. That's where the Blake Corums and those types of backs are going to start to come off the board a little bit. And I think that that's where you're going to see Audric potentially late third, but it could slip into the fourth.
Some other positions too, Ryan, that are going to be interesting is because there are several positions in this draft class, in my opinion, and I didn't study it as much as you did, obviously, but I'm going to share my thoughts to then kind of kick it to you.
Okay.
I felt like there was a couple really good edge players at the top of the draft, and then a bit of a drop off, and then another drop off.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did not love the depth of the edge. Do you see that position maybe getting a little bit bypassed in round 2? Because normally round 2 is when you start to see teams in past years, like you start to see these edge players coming off some upside. Obviously, it's a little bit different, a little bit different this year. Do you think edge is a position that could maybe get pushed down a little bit with the way that the board fell, or do you think we could see some edge guys come off today?
I think we're going to see probably 2 to 3 edges in the second rounds potentially. Like I was looking at the board, and I think Chris Braswell out of Alabama is viewed a little bit more as maybe a higher floor type of dude, despite only having 1 year of production. I think Adisa Isaac fits in there. Braylon Trice from Washington is another one. So I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of those guys come off in the second. And I think third round to fourth round is going to be dedicated to some of the high upside rushers, the Jalix Hunts that I've talked about, the Austin Bookers out of Kansas, like those guys that are still lighter built, need to add weight to their frame, like those types of guys. I think that's where we're going to see them in more in the third to fourth range. But I think guys like Braylon Trice will potentially here in the second round.
Sounds good. Here's a position that also didn't get addressed yesterday, Ryan, and there's still some talented players on the board. Obviously, one of the freakier athletes in the draft class. Obviously, Peyton Wilson's on the board, but he's got a very, very checkered past from an injury standpoint. Where do you think we'll see some linebackers come off the board today? Obviously, Edgerrin Cooper still out there, Junior Colson, Cedric Gray, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And then there's right now I think highly unlikely that Maris Leofau is going to get picked tonight, but I've seen some people have him round 4, and if round 4 maybe somebody likes him even more. What about linebacker, Ryan? Where do you think that run starts tonight? First of all, do you think Peyton Wilson's the first linebacker to come off the board?
No, I don't.
You think the kid from A&M will be?
I actually think it might be Junior Colson from Michigan.
From Michigan.
Is my guy. I like that kid a lot. I think that the second most likely out of the 3 would be Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M, just because the injuries for Peyton Wilson are scary, man. Like, I mean, just it is. I mean, he's had multiple shoulder injuries, season-ending shoulder injuries for a linebacker. Like it's tough to stomach. Like shoulder injuries, chronic shoulder injuries. It's just not
a linebacker.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. But I do think that Peyton Wilson will still be drafted on day 2, just because kid's really good. I mean, freaky athlete, production, really good football player, right? So he'll be drafted. I think those are the first 3 linebackers drafted, though. I would guess is. Again, no particular order. Junior Colson, Peyton Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper. I think those are the 3. After that, it's a crapshoot, honestly. Like, I don't know if there's going to be another linebacker drafted on day 2. I mean, it's possible there's not. Look, guys, I know, and I think someone talked about it yesterday, but Some people really like Jeremiah Trotter Jr., but Jeremiah
Yeah.
Trotter Jr., I'm telling you, I do not think the NFL likes Jeremiah Trotter Jr. as much as the random person on Twitter likes Jeremiah Trotter Jr.
Yeah.
because the kid, and he framed it this way, and I think that he actually doomed himself when he said this, Brian. In an interview, he said this. He said, I'm an old school linebacker in a modern linebacker's body. And I'm like, that means you can't run, but you're
Right.
small.
Right.
Fantastic. That's
Right.
not good, Jeremiah. That's
I'm
not
strong
good,
but slow.
brother.
Yes. Yes.
I'm my
yes.
father, but I'm not 6'2", 260 in a running
Right.
era. Congratulations.
Exactly. That ain't good. That ain't good. You know, you talk about Peyton Wilson, Ryan, though. That is 100% an example, in my opinion, a first-round talent that's going to fall because of the medicals. I mean, because what's there not to like outside of that? He's 6'4". He's 235 pounds. He ran a 4.43 at the combine, had a 34.5-inch vertical, basically a 10-foot broad, had a 1.54 split. This past year, he had 138 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 6 pass breakups, and 3 interceptions. Like, those are elite, like, butt kiss award winning, top 15 NFL draft pick numbers and production. 6'4", 235, ran a low 4.4, jumps out of the gym for a kid that size, elite production in the run game, pass rushing, and in coverage.
Yep.
But you're just going to have a hard time investing a first-round pick in a guy that you don't know can make it through a whole season. Because this was the first year he's actually been healthy for most of a season in his career. But man, he's talented.
Oh yeah,
man, he's talented.
He is a top 35, 40 player in every single year just based upon film. But it's simply because we talk about this with Cam Hart in the shoulders all the time, Brian, right? Cam Hart's shoulder injuries are an issue, but he plays corner where I could work around that a little bit if I really wanted to, right? Peyton Wilson at linebacker, bro, like you can't work around having bad shoulders. Like you can't work around it. You have to tackle. That's literally what's wrong with it, right? But yeah, the kid's a freaky athlete, and I think that he'll be a really good player on the NFL level for as long as you can have him. I just don't know. And again, not a doctor. I don't know how long you're going to have him is the problem there.
Right. Last position that we did not see get addressed last night, Ryan, safety. We did not see any safeties picked. There's a couple players in that I think are good day 2 picks. And I didn't think there was any first-round safeties from what I saw. I didn't. No one even close. I saw a few people that had Tyler Nubin as a first-round pick. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Some good safeties that maybe could be available for day 3. That's another position. I want to ask you this, Ryan, as we kind of wrap this up.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, first of all, did you do a day 2 mock draft? Are you one of those guys that does that?
I did a 7-rounder. So
no, I mean, like
not a new one.
That's what that's what some people will do.
Didn't have enough time for that.
How do you see the first top? Yeah, your boss is always making you work all the dang time.
No, it's just I like literally just there's no time in the day for that type of stuff. No time.
What are your thoughts on how you see day 2 kind of shaping up? So we kind of went into some specific positions and stuff. You know, you look at it, obviously right now, we could give you who's picking where, but, you know, we'll see. I do think I have no intel, just my opinion. I think there's going to be a lot of movement. First 10 picks of the second round, you got the Bills at 33, the Patriots, the Cardinals, the Commanders, the Chargers, the Titans, the Panthers, the Commanders again, and the Packers, and then the Texans. The Texans are on my short list of teams that I'm currently being recruited by to maybe flip my allegiance to commit to as a fan. I got Troy Pride offered me some Texans gear because he got signed by the Texans offseason. So we'll see about that. But how do you see kind of the first round shaking up, Ryan? Who are the guys that you see being taken, whether they're guys that are taken by one of those 10 teams or people trading into those? And that'll be the first part. And then wrap things up, Ryan, with who do you think, do you have any teams in mind that you think could be early movers in day 2 that are going to be looking to say, hey, look, we have a chance to jump up there and get a guy that we like?
Sure. Well, I was looking at the order, and if I just had to make like quicker predictions, wide receiver, Buffalo Bills, wide receiver, New England Patriots, I think that would make a lot of sense for both of those teams. Arizona Cardinals can go almost anywhere. I think corner makes a lot of sense, and there's obviously a couple of really good corners on the board there if they are picking at 35. Washington Commanders need an offensive tackle desperately. I would be shocked if number 36 was not an offensive tackle. Chargers, wide receiver. I think we're going to get a really early run on receivers. Like, there's no doubt about it. I would not be shocked because I actually expect Buffalo Bills and New England Patriots to take wide receivers back to back to starters here. Chargers may move up to 35 with the Cardinals. I mean, to make sure that you don't miss out on wide receiver 3 on day 2. Like, let's say Keon Coleman and Lad McConkey go 1-2 here. Maybe you go up to 35 and make sure you get a Jalen Polk or an A.D. Mitchell or someone in that vein, right? Like, I think forecasting they're a little bit forward. I think this is going to be a wide receiver, corner, offensive tackle heavy start to this conversation. And I'm just cycling down the wild card here. 44. That was the spot I was talking about earlier. Las Vegas Raiders. Spencer Rattler time? Question mark? I don't know, but they're talking about
right
it.
Now it's Aiden O'Connell, right?
Aiden O'Connell, and they signed Gardner Minshew, I believe, as well this offseason. So that's their.
I'm sure
that's
Max Crosby was super thrilled about that.
Yeah, sure he was.
That'll be interesting, Ryan. That's a total Raiders move. Total Raiders move. I could see that.
I love Max Crosby, by the way.
Yeah.
I interviewed him coming out of Eastern Michigan before he was Max Crosby, and he was very normal at that point. He has gotten very. He's
it is interesting how that happens when guys get to the NFL and they just get kind of.
I heard he's a great dude, but like the on-field demeanor is like, oh, he's kind of a psychopath. I like it though. I dig.
Yeah, they may. Who knows? They may take Jatavion Sanders. Who I say jokingly.
Double down. Theo Johnson,
on tight end, baby. We're gonna have the best tight end room in the history of the game.
That's funny though. I might, after we go, do a real quick 7-round just for the Raiders and just give them all tight ends the rest of the way.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll figure it out from there.
There you go. There you go. So got to be some positional flexibility in there somewhere. This guy can grow into a tackle, and there you go. I'm curious to see when the cornerback, when DeJean and Kool-Aid go, especially Cooper DeJean. I have to think the injury has got to be playing a factor in this because I love his film and the testing is phenomenal.
I was going to say, it's just kind of weird because he obviously was cleared for the pro day and tested really well. So you wouldn't think the injury would be that big of a deal. But white corners, man, just undervalued in today's world. So
you're just trying to get me demonetized, aren't you?
How's that demonetized at level? That's not demonetized at all.
I've thought about that. I mean, because I can't. Part of me is like, look, the 3 corners that got taken, I'm okay. I might have taken Cooper DeJean over a couple of them, depending on the fit, but I'm not like, oh man, you should have taken Cooper DeJean. I just think it's how the board fell. Yeah. I think he fell because the cornerback position as a whole fell. If somebody trades with Denver up to number 12 to get either Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell, then I don't think there's any way that he falls past, Baltimore or Detroit, a couple of those teams like that, right? Because then Terrion Arnold would have got pumped up. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious how it's going to play out. But he's an excellent player.
Arizona Cardinals at 35 is a very cornerback-centric. Washington could be. I think they need an offensive tackle, though, but Washington could be in a corner spot.
Let me ask you this question, Ryan.
And the Chargers at 37. Yeah.
Here's the problem here's the dilemma that Washington is in, and this is what we talked about earlier. You're saying that tackles both are needs, but tackle's a much bigger need than for corner right now. But is the tackle good enough compared to a Cooper DeJean or a Kool-Aid McKinstry, depending on how you view the fit into their defensive system? I don't have the answer to that. That's the way I look at it is yes, because the tackles on the board that I see, none of them are in the same league as players as Cooper DeJean. So, maybe you take a Blake Fisher, round 3, or maybe trade up a couple spots if Blake falls in the end of round 2 or something like that.
Washington also has 2 in the next few picks because they have 40 as well. So they have 36 and 40. So.
I would say take the better corner there because there's a pretty good chance that whatever tackle you liked is going to be on the board at 40 when you pick. So that would be a way that I look at it. Or do they package those, one of those picks to move up or something? I don't know. We'll see how it shakes out. But that's the receiver corner run that I expect to happen is going to make things very interesting early in day 2. So, And then as a former Broncos fan, I guess I can sit back and chill because they're not going to be picking in round 2 tonight. So,
what's their next pick? 3rd or 4th?
3rd round. Yeah. I think it's late 3rd. I don't even think it's their own 3rd round pick. Actually,
Sorry, man. They got Bo Nix. They'll be fine.
Yeah. You're just, but the Texans are an interesting team, Ryan, for me. I'm just kind of was joking about the becoming a fan. Well, kind of not joking, but I kind of was joking. But they're a team that hasn't picked yet, and they made some noise last year, obviously, and I'm very curious to see if they might be a team. You've got a franchise quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they go? Do you go for another receiver? Right? They just got Stephon Diggs, but he's going to be a free agent in this offseason. Is he a 1-year rental? Is he a guy that they're going to try to, sign to a long-term deal? There's a lot of different things that you could see them doing, but do they need help on defense? They're a team that could go a lot of different directions, but they're a team that's on the verge of maybe taking that next step to where what they do early round 2, do they move up? Do they move down? Do they stay firm and take the best available? Very curious to see what the Texans do, Ryan. Who did you have mocked to them? And then how could you see that one play? I know, right? Because it's
a great question.
It was all the way yesterday, and there's been a lot's happened since then. You ever see the movie The Rock with Nicolas Cage?
No.
And Sean Connery. It's a really good movie for us older people. But there's a scene where his girlfriend's talking to Nicolas Cage about being pregnant. And he's like, I don't know. He's in weapons and stuff. You had Enos Rakestraw, by the way. But
is that right? Okay. I was literally looking as you were talking.
He's like, I don't know why anyone would bring a kid into this world. And she's like, well, I hope you don't mean that. And he goes, why? She goes, because I'm pregnant. And so then he says something and she's like, you don't mean what you said. And he goes, well, I did at the time, but gosh, a lot's changed since then. You know what I mean? Like a lot's changed in the last 5 minutes. But you have corner there for them.
Yeah.
And I know that
corner edge would make sense.
I've seen people mock Cam Hart to them in the draft as well, because they have a pick at number 59. That was probably the highest, one of the higher spots that I saw. And I actually saw one mock draft about 3 weeks ago that actually had Cam Hart being mocked to them at 42.
That's crazy high.
I'm trying to remember who that was, but they had Cam Hart going to them at 42.
Houston would fit him well because Houston obviously is D'Amico Ryans, who spent some time with the San Francisco 49ers and out of the Robert Saleh cover 3 heavy type of formation, right? Like they do like length and that physicality and that zone disciplining corner. So that could be a fit. I don't know if it'll be a 42, but could definitely be a fit.
That'd be great if it did for Cam's sake.
42 be wild.
Okay. Yeah. Ryan, any other thoughts that you have? Any other day 3 thoughts that you have? Again, Blake Fisher, Cam Hart, and Audric Estime are all the Notre Dame players that are kind of on the potential lookout for tonight for Notre Dame. But any final thoughts, Ryan, before we wrap up and get ready for day 2 of the 2024 NFL Draft?
I mean, I think today's just about the gambles a little bit, right? This is where we're going to see some of the guys that are flying down boards a little bit due to injuries and some off the field stuff. I mean, A.D. Mitchell's a guy,
one, right? Johnny Newton's another.
Yep. Johnny Newton. I would say that there's T'Vondre Sweat off the field stuff. We talked about Cooper DeJean as a guy that's had a little bit of the medical stuff this offseason. So I think teams are going to find tremendous value in this round because there's going to be a couple guys that would ordinarily have been probably in the back end of the first round. Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon's another guy that probably would have been in the first round.
That's right. There's Zach 2 good centers on the board. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Zach
3.
Frazier.
I like Cedric Van Pran, not as a necessarily round 2 guy, but he's maybe a 3rd, 4th round guy that could bring some value too. But yeah, we haven't seen a center get taken yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll be a fun night, Ryan. That's the moral of the story. It's going to be a fun night, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So, Ryan, thank you for doing a little audible with me today. And we didn't talk recruiting, but I had fun talking about the draft. Ryan was like, let's, I said to Ryan, I was like, hey, let's do a draft show. So he sends me the preview for the show, and he puts recruiting hour on it. And then I'm like, oh, he's going to do recruiting today.
There was a potential recruiting topic at the end that we didn't get to. So,
But it was fun. Enjoyed it, Ryan. And I know you and I will be texting a lot about how tonight goes as well. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Thank you all so much for being with us. Hit that like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Check out the full-length breakdown I did of the Notre Dame offensive line from the Blue Gold game. Some really good stuff in there, in my opinion, if I do say so myself. Grades, analysis, all that good stuff. You only get it as a member of the Irish Breakdown Premium Board. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So have a wonderful rest of your day, folks. We'll be back with you again here very soon. We may do a wrap-up show this weekend of the draft from a Notre Dame standpoint. Some other things we'll see here, who that would be, when we would do that. But be on the lookout. But Ryan, that's why you need to make sure you're subscribed and you've hit the notification bell. So if we do decide to do a show this weekend, you will know. So have a great day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.